This meeting is being recorded.
All right, good evening, everyone. This is Lori Charlton. It's January 10th, 2023. I want to wish everyone a happy new year and welcome you to our first regular meeting of 2023 of the Board of Finance. I'll call the meeting to order and ask that we rise while our colleague, Mr. Mottola, leads us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of
The United States of America,
and to the republic for which it stands,
the Republic
one nation,
which is
under God, indivisible, with liberty and
indivisible,
justice for all.
For liberty and justice.
liberty and justice for all.
All right, to the members of the public who've dialed in or joined us on the WebEx tonight, please know that you're muted and will not be heard by board members. Typically, we welcome live public comment during meetings when there are voting items on the agenda. This evening, we will invite public comment on items 3 and 4. For anyone joining the meeting remotely who wishes to comment on either of those two agenda items, please indicate so in the chat box now or at any time before the items are heard. As always, members of the public are encouraged to send their comments and questions in writing to the board at bof@fairfieldct.org. If you do so, please remember to include your name and address for the record as you would with live comment. So for tonight's agenda, again, we have two voting items. These are related to state grants that need to be formally accepted by this board. We're going to hear an update from the town's Director of Community and Economic Development. We have a financial update on the Recreation Revolving Fund. And for members of the public, the revolving fund is a separate accounting entity from the town's general fund, and it's used to account for revenues and expenses related to Parks and Rec programs. In addition, we'll hear an update from the town's internal auditor related to her activities over the last year, including the results of internal audits that were performed, and an update on the status of recommendations from the DPW audit that was issued in the spring of 2020. Again, for members of the public, the DPW audit encompassed a review and testing of the town's internal controls and procedures. It was performed by the town's independent auditors, and it was commissioned by this board in late 2019 in the wake of the fill pile incident. So with that, we will move to item 3, to hear, consider, and act upon the following resolution as recommended by the Board of Selectmen. Resolved that First Selectwoman Brenda L. Kupchak be and hereby is authorized to accept, on behalf of the town of Fairfield, a 2022 Connecticut STEEP grant in the amount of $500,000 for sidewalk rehabilitation and extension. And further resolved that First Selectwoman Brenda L. Kupchak is hereby authorized to enter into and execute any and all agreements, contracts, and documents necessary to obtain said 2022 STEEP grant with the state of Connecticut. This item was approved by the Board of Selectmen yesterday and also requires RTM approval. Can I have a motion to put this item before us? Mr. Mottola, seconded by Ms. LeClaire. Thank you. The backup materials for this item are posted online on pages 1 through 4. The backup includes the grant award letter from the state. It also includes the 14-point summary for the sidewalk project, which has a total estimated cost of $611,000, $500,000 of which would be covered by this grant. To be clear, we're only approving acceptance of the grant with this resolution and not the project itself. Mr. Bill Hurley, the town engineering manager, is here to take us through this item. Welcome, Mr. Hurley.
Thank you, Lori. Good evening, Board of Finance members. The grant request is to construct new sidewalks and repairs and to provide connectivity to the Post Road and Fairfield Center. With support of the neighborhood, a new sidewalk is proposed for Round Hill Road. For Reef Road, new sections of sidewalk will be replaced as needed. The engineering and DPW will provide in-house design and specifications. The project is covered by the $500,000 reimbursement STEEP grant. The state requirement was to have all the acceptance resolutions approved within 15 days, but we were able to request an extension of 6 weeks, to go through the town approval process. Property owners along Round Hill Road and Ermine Street have waited 3 years for sidewalk funding. Sidewalks will provide access to Ludlow Schools, Fairfield Center, and US 1 and Post Road from Round Hill and Reef Roads. There are several areas of existing sidewalk on Reef Road that are uneven and are in poor condition, and they would have to be replaced probably within the next year or two anyway. Going through some of the 14 points alternatives, really the only other alternative is to do nothing, lose the grant, and continue to perform repairs on a site-specific basis, a little bit here, a panel here or there. This would continue to burden the Fairfield DPW schedule and is not considered cost-effective. The STEEP grant, as mentioned before, it's $500,000 in eligible reimbursement costs, which represented the max amount of award possible. So it emphasized that the importance of this project, that the state awarded us the full $500,000. There is a town share component, and that's one of the reasons why we haven't presented the project as a whole. The $111,298 represents the town match. As we get further details of the grant, we can determine whether this amount will come from non-capital recurring. It would be DBW if they have any money in the budget, maybe Housing and Development if they have money, or if we are allowed in-kind services such as design. So that's, as I said, the reason why we're just going for the grant approval today. Time-sensitive measure of $500,000 I think was important not to lose it. So if anyone says, well, what about if we take the cost share out of the DPW budget? It would supplant other projects that they have in the hopper, and so other neighborhoods, wouldn't get done, and maybe even some sections of downtown that were on the schedule as well. We have overall support of the Round Hill and Ermine neighborhoods and the Fairfield Bike and Ped Committee. So I'm here to answer any other further questions you may have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hurley. Questions from the board? Mr. Mottola?
Yeah, thank you, Bill. Where on Round Hill Road? From like Post Road going up that way, or?
Well, it was really started by the neighborhoods of Ermine, and so from Barlow down to like Elm, Paper Mill, that area there. And then when the grant became available, in order to really highlight the connectivity, which is really needed anyway, we were going to extend the sidewalk underneath the 95 and then connect it to the existing sidewalk by the park and ride that goes down towards Route 1 underneath the underpass.
Okay. Yep.
So,
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mottola. Ms. Leclerc?
I just wanted to follow up. So we'll go all the way to the Post Road?
Yes.
Okay.
That's our intention. Yep.
And we'll do side streets off of?
No,
No,
for this
it's
one
just
here, yeah,
Round Hill.
because we're doing also Reef Road, we
Those are
didn't
two
want to
big streets.
go too far. We're always looking though for grant money, and if there's other opportunities, we'll look into them for sure.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Leclerc. Mr. Curley?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Bill. The Board of Finance had received an email from one of our residents, and it had a laundry list of questions related to this specific topic. And if it's okay with you, Madam Chair, I'd like to kind of use that email to just ask a series of questions so that we can make sure that this particular person's questions are addressed. It was received from Suzanne Miska. It was addressed to the entire Board of Finance. So, Bill, I'll just bear with me as I just ask you some questions. We'll just go back and forth for a little
Sure.
bit. That's
Excuse
okay.
me, is it over? What do you have an address by any chance? Because that might help.
Let's see. She did not provide her
there's no
address.
address.
Oh, okay. All
All
right.
Street address. Oh, no, she did. 123 Rygate Road is Suzanne Miska's email.
Oh, okay, sure.
So she asked a series of questions. So she asked, why are we stopping at Irvine Street as the rest of Round Hill Road would be unpaved to 95? If I heard you correctly on your response to Ms. Leclerc, we actually are going past.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so that's good. And then she said, follow-up question to that would be, she actually wanted to thank the DPW for cleaning the sidewalk on Duck Farm. Apparently there's been work there, so she wanted to pass along her thanks.
Sure.
But she wanted to generally ask, why do we keep building sidewalks that end abruptly? Is it just part of a plan that, at some further, at later date, we'll just connect to those abruptly ended sidewalks? Is that part of the plan?
Well, I think that goes back to the first question, because actually this one, we go to the Post Road, it goes all the way to Barlow, which will connect the existing sidewalk that runs along Barlow and along Round Hill Road by the university there. So this is a huge connectivity component, and this, as I said, this is one of the ones that we were looking for grants for several years to make this project happen. So this has been on our radar, and as mentioned before, the neighborhood has been very patient and is excited to have this project go forward.
You're gonna be able to walk on a sidewalk from theoretically Mill Plain Road all the way down to Round Hill Road to the Post Road, right?
That's correct.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's huge.
And then actually go
Okay.
through
Yeah.
downtown and then
Right.
follow Mill
Right.
Plain all the way around. So,
Yep.
if you really want to do a long loop, you
Yeah.
certainly can do that. And if not, we have shorter spurs that neighborhoods could do.
Sorry to interrupt, apologies.
Yeah. No, that's great, and that actually dovetails in. She asked the question, shouldn't the goal be to connect to Fairfield Center? And it sounds like that's exactly what we're doing here.
Yep, for the university, correct.
So she had some other questions, Madam Chair, but they're not pertinent to this particular topic, so I'm going to stop my questioning there. So I'm all set. Thank you, Mr. Early.
You're
All right,
welcome.
thank you, Mr. Curley. Any other questions from the board on this item? Ms. Marmion?
Thank you. So can you just give us some perspective on how this specific grant and these sidewalks fit into the overall kind of plan for sidewalks? You mentioned that this neighborhood has been waiting for 3 years.
Mhm.
So this is part of our ongoing sidewalk development program, and we happen to get the grant. But it fits into our overall plan,
Oh, yes,
correct?
definitely, yeah. Overall, there are a couple of things that come into play. MetroCog had done a master plan for bike routes, sidewalks, things like that. The DPW and engineering compiled a map around 2015, and we updated every year to basically, as Suzanne had requested, to connect fill in the missing sidewalks so we could create a sidewalk network. So we have those on a list as well. And then we constantly, to be honest with you, we probably got between 20 and 30 requests for sidewalks throughout, the year. Sometimes they're just small sections of repair, and other times we've had somebody request, 4 miles of sidewalk. And unfortunately, although it might be a viable project, we just can't afford that. So I have like a little internal matrix system. We talk to, town officials, neighborhood group, Bike and Ped sometimes they have some input, and then we go from there to try to develop a list of, I'll say between, 2 and 5 streets, depending on what's available. And then you might recall last year, John Marsilio presented all the boards with the paving plan.
Right.
And in that paving plan, there's a section of sidewalks. And so they still have a little bit, the sidewalk portion isn't completed yet, but, because we wanted them to do the paving first. So they have like a condition assessment of sidewalks as well. So that will be taken into consideration.
But this fits into our overall
Yes.
plan for sidewalks.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah,
Thank you.
definitely. These 2 areas, definitely, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marmion. Mr. Curley, you had a follow-up?
Yeah, thank you. And Mr. Early, you touched on it. I know that the DPW does have sidewalks in their paving plan, but I couldn't recall off the top of my head what the dollar amount is for their annual sidewalk portion of the plan. Do you know what that number is?
Yeah, it's, if it hasn't changed, it's approximately $70,000, which isn't really a lot.
And-
They do have,
I was gonna-
okay, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask, of the 70,000, what does that translate into in terms of linear feet or miles or however you would measure that? I wouldn't be able to guess.
At most, it's a half a mile. I don't even think it covers that. We do have, in full disclosure, we do have some money in ARPA that we are also extending. Some of the sidewalks are that we are proposing, but it also includes, and this was important, when we go to pave a road, by law, we have to make it handicap accessible if it has sidewalks. And so they've been using a lot of money to improve all the handicap ramps whenever they pave a road. And as part of this grant, we'll be doing, obviously, handicap accessible ramps as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Curley. Any other questions from the board? Ms. Leclerc?
Just as a follow-up to that, do we have any plans to increase the sidewalk to connect Fairfield Center to Southport? There's that little piece that we don't have sidewalks there along the post road.
Not immediately, but long-term, we do. I'm almost positive it's part of the master plan. I can check that for you, of course. But again, something like that, we would hope that whether it be subdivisions or commercial properties develop, usually zoning requires that, and so that's a little bonus, and that's how we can sometimes get sidewalks extended. So.
Okay. And then also with planning sidewalks, do we work with the Board of Ed at all to increase walkers to schools? I guess, because there's some areas that have to be bused because they don't have sidewalks.
That's a good point. They used to have a program called Safe Routes to School, and around 2011, 2012, we had a grant for that, and we had to work through the school to get all the sidewalks. It was mainly around the Ludlow campus. It was Uncle Road and Uncle Road West and a little section of Mill Plain,
Right.
where so we had done that work. We usually do work in conjunction with the school. Last in December, I met with Angelus and Sal from the Board of Ed and just discussed, crossing guards, in crosswalk pedestrian signs and things like that. So we are in constant communication with the Board of Ed. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Leclerc. Mr. Testani?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. How are you? Just a couple quick things. So, yeah, and you may have said it, so forgive me. What's the time frame on this? Is there a date, a specific date?
Well, the design of Round Hill Road through the Ermine section, that's already been done. We would just continue to do the section by 95, and then for Reef Road, we still have to do that design. So figure we would finish the design sometime in late spring, and then from there, we would do the specifications early summer, and so maybe midsummer, we'd put it out to bid, and then we could start the project, hopefully constructing it this fall.
And when is this grant, and again, forgive me, you may have said it, what is the time frame of the grant itself?
Typically, steep grant, if I recall, they give you 3 years to do the work.
Okay.
So it should be no problem. And if we encounter some hurdle somewhere along the line, if we give them an advance notice and it's a viable reason, sometimes they give us a 1-year extension. So that really shouldn't be an issue.
And as far as the town's acceptance of the grant, is there a time limit on that?
Well, yeah, they wanted 15 days originally, and so I
And
said.
you asked for an extension,
Yeah, we
right?
asked for extension, saying that, our town board process usually takes 6 weeks. It just so happens everything falls in January this time around.
Yeah, right.
So it might only be 4 weeks, but if we get the approvals, we'll get the signatures, the RTM hopefully passes the resolution, and we send it in, and that's that kicks off the grant process where they'll come out with agreements. We give the first select woman the right to sign on them, and we get the grant that way. If we have to go for capital non-recurring money,
The
I have to come back.
111,000.
I'd have some backup of why we would need to do that.
Right.
And then we would go from there. If it comes out of budgets, so be it. But I'd probably say I'll probably come back to you, but we'll double check and make sure we've exhausted all the other
Okay.
funding sources first.
And just to follow up a little bit of what you were talking about with Ms. Leclerc, the Safe Routes to School, I think that's very interesting. Was that a state program? Was it a?
It was a kind of a nationwide program, but it was a state grant.
Oh,
And
okay.
they've kind of combined it into other forms of grant. There was one, it was then switched to T21, then they call it something else, and then they do include the STEEP as that potential too, if you want to do Safe Routes to School. It's
But
basically.
they still use that term?
Well, they do in a certain aspect
The state
of,
does.
yeah, but it doesn't have its own separate grant. It's now under an umbrella of another grant.
And but it's geared toward the town, not specific to the Board of Ed, correct?
Well, with for steep and other sidewalk grants, it would not be related to school, but the
Right.
Safe Routes to School program, what it really emphasizes, there's like the 4 E's, there's engineering, enforcement, education, and like evaluation. So again, evaluation to make sure the kids are walking to school where they can. Nice weather, it has a tendency, we have some schools where there's over 100 students that walk to school.
Right.
This time of the year, it obviously drops off, as the weather gets bad, but it ramps up again in the spring. And so these are usually requested by parents who walk the kids to school or have their kids, if they're old enough, maybe middle school age, to
Interesting.
walk to school. But it's a whole program that we have dealt with the school in the past, and it could fall under one of the umbrellas or spokes,
the
so to
other
speak,
grants
of
that
the
you were
grants,
talking
right,
about.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Very
Sure.
good. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Testani. Any other questions from the board? Okay, seeing none, I see no requests for public comment, so we can put this item to a vote. All those in favor of accepting the STEEP grant in the amount of $500,000 and authorizing the first selectwoman to enter into and execute any and all agreements, contracts, and documents necessary to obtain that grant, please say aye.
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 Aye, okay, great. It is unanimous, 7-0. For the record, Mr. Welsh sent his regrets. He has had another business commitment, and Mr. Stark is traveling in Europe, so it's the middle of the night for him now.
Madam Chairman, I think it's 8-0.
No, Stark's not here.
8?
Kevin's not
Oh,
here.
Kevin's not here.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, you're right.
7, you're right.
Yeah,
I thought it was.
yeah, so we're missing
Yeah,
2.
yeah, right.
So our unanimous votes would be 7-0
Yeah,
tonight.
sorry about that.
All right.
Thanks, I just want to really, if it may, just thank the team for getting the grant, Mark Barnhart, Kerry Brown, some other members of engineering, and DPW, and some town officials also helped. I just want to throw the plug in. It wasn't just a solo effort, so.
Yes, thank you to everyone. I appreciate you mentioning that, Mr. Hurley. Okay, we're going to move to item 4, to hear, consider, and act upon the following resolution as recommended by the Board of Selectmen. Resolved that First Selectwoman Brenda L. Kupchak be and hereby is authorized to accept on behalf of the town of Fairfield the Connecticut Communities Challenge Grant Round 2 in the amount of $3 million for replacement of a 2,800-foot section of the East Trunk Sewer Line. Resolved that First Selectwoman Brenda L. Kupchak is hereby authorized to enter into and execute any and all agreements, contracts, and documents necessary to obtain said Connecticut Communities Challenge Grant with the state of Connecticut. This item was also approved by the Board of Selectmen yesterday and requires RTM approval. Can I have a motion to put this item before us? Mr. Testani, seconded by Ms. Marmion. Okay, so this item is similar to the one that we just voted on in that it's acceptance of a grant only, not the approval of the related project. Unlike the one we just discussed, this one is part of a much larger project, and we are going to have a fulsome discussion on this going forward. So if you know, given that we have a very lengthy agenda tonight, if we could focus our questions on just acceptance of the grant itself, since we, you know, we will have, you know, significant and robust discussions, perhaps more than one, when the project does come up for approval. The backup to this item includes the grant application and the award letter, as well as the 14-point summary. That's all starting on page 5 of the online backup. I think that is it. Mr. Hurley, you want to take us through this one as well?
Sure, I can. The East Trunk Sewer handles about 2/3 of the town's sewer flow to the treatment plant. The sewer was originally constructed in 1947 and follows the layout of Ash Creek. There are indications that the pipe has sagged and joints have opened up along this section. Construction of the new sewer line will significantly reduce I&I, which is what we call inflow and infiltration, and reduce sanitary sewer overflows, and provide easier maintenance access and better resiliency against the Ash Creek flows and rising sea level. The project the plans are about 90% complete. They were completed around 2019. And funding issues, we, again, just similar to other projects, we were kind of waiting for grants, and we were able to at least get one here. The project proposes to construct a new sewer line and away from Ash Creek and within the public roadway and right-of-way. The project will also reduce some bottlenecks and increase capacity by about 15 to 20% for future development. The project has been reviewed by DOT and all the necessary permits have been obtained. The proposal is to install a new 36-inch diameter sanitary sewer trunk line to replace the aged and undersized section of the sanitary sewer main susceptible to that inflow and infiltration and the storm system overflows, and even access issues. The project is expected to take 14 to 18 months, depending on the notice to proceed and if any winter work can be performed. And, you know, just, well, it does, if you read the grant, it has the backup information, but since we're just doing the grant, I'll stick to that. There are a few alternatives that were brought up in the past. They were constructing a pump station, but creating a bypass or an overflow, relining the pipe, and even trenchless technology was looked at. That was another reason why from 2019 to now, because we constantly looked for cost-saving measures, and unfortunately, they either were more costly, less feasible, or less practical. The new sewer life would have a 50 and probably 75-year sewer service life. And as I said, we were very fortunate, I think, to get this competitive grant for $3 million. So I'm here to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hurley. First of all, I want to congratulate you and everyone else who was involved in this effort. This is terrific that we were able to secure a grant of this size, and I know there were very few communities in the state that did. So congratulations and thanks to everyone who was involved.
Sure.
Before I turn it over to the board for any questions, I do just want to clarify. So in our last meeting, we had a discussion and postponed a vote on the East Trunk sewer line, which was, I'm going to call it phase 1. So I think you talked to us about 2 phases, phase 1 and phase 2. So this $3 million grant, as I understand it, is not related to, this is not related to the $6 million project we heard initially last month, but it's related to phase 2. Is that accurate?
Yes, they're 2 separate projects, but they're adjacent to each other, so they kind of go hand in hand.
Okay.
Correct.
Right, okay, but so I know the one that we, just so that everyone's clear, the project that we discussed a month ago and postponed a vote on, that one had a $750,000 grant attached. That was the $6 million project. This is phase 2, which you have listed here with an estimated cost of $10 million. this $3 million grant is related to that. Okay. So again, I'll open it up for questions, but I just again want to emphasize that we are, that we will be discussing approval of the project itself on a later date. Mr. Mottola?
Thank you. And I won't ask, I'm gonna have other questions when we're gonna do the funding. My only question is, I don't know if you have this in front of you, Bill. Part of our backup is a December 19th, 2022 letter from the state that awarded the grant. And the second paragraph of that letter, it talks about that the grant will be used by the town to support a sewer infrastructure project located in the public right-of-way, which will enable further development of the Metro Trans-oriented community. Then it talks about what that development's gonna be. It says the resultant development following completion of the infrastructure will include 357 new housing units, of which 20% will be affordable at varying levels, 118 key hotel, 70,000 square feet of commercial office space, and 40,000 square feet of retail space. That's not, we don't know if that's gonna happen, right?
Right.
Not contingent.
It's not, is getting this money contingent on all those things happening?
Not all of them. They do want to see some development
Development.
there.
We can't just
No,
put the
but we
sewer line and
can't
not do
guarantee
anything.
them all those,
All
no,
right.
but they do want, they do want to see some development. They don't want to, give us 3 million and not have anything developed.
All right. So
But,
there has
uh,
to be development, but it's not, receiving this grant's not contingent on all those things happening.
No, no.
Okay.
John,
Page are you
thank
on?
you.
Oh, I'm sorry, I printed this off because I'm on page of the backup. I'm sorry, let me just pull it up.
Bill, did they give you a time frame as to, so you're saying it doesn't include all of these things that Mr. Mottola was pointing out, right? Did they give you specifics about what they would want to see in the way of development?
Well,
Thank you, right. That's a better word.
Page
I'll
5.
introduce myself, Mark Barnhart,
Oh, Mark,
Director
there
of
you
Community
are.
Economic Development. Just to be clear, the project that was referenced here was what was approved as part of the master plan by TP&Z for the Fairfield Metro Center development. So that is the master plan of development that has been approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission previously.
Yep.
So that is what we referenced in the application. Obviously, there needs to be, in order to secure the money, the state wanted to be assured that, there's two conditions typically when the state provides funds. But for this assistance, this project would not get built. So that was part of our argument. And then secondly, what's the upside to the state? So the state is obviously looking to do transit-oriented development, and we referenced the project that had already been approved by TP&Z and is intended to be built by the development team.
Okay.
So-
The grant is coming from.
Oh, yeah.
The
my
grant
friends in
is coming from
DEC.
Economic and Community
Yeah,
Development.
it is, yeah.
It
Right.
wasn't a
Yeah.
DEP or a DOT
Right.
grant, so we had to have that component in there, and so we certainly made reference to
All right.
those approvals.
That's all I had, Lori, thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mottola. And Mr. Barnhart, glad you're here tonight.
Yeah.
You comes in handy aside from your presentation.
I'm sure we'll get to
Mr.
it.
DeWitt.
Yeah, and that same topic, the capacity for all of that potential is in the plan, right?
Well,
So-
yeah, that's
so
why we're going from
everything
33 to
materialized-
36,
Right,
correct.
so that's the reason for the increase, which, is kind of a nice thing to plan for that capacity, even if you don't have all that.
It
right?
actually, as part of the development of the train station infrastructure, we had upsized a portion of the existing trunk sewer that traversed the site.
Oh, okay.
From 30-inch to 36-inch.
Oh, okay.
We didn't have money to go off-site, obviously, to cross the wetland area, so that's a subsequent phase. So we got as far as we could to
Yeah.
try to upscale the project, anticipating that with the new train station, there would be development demand in the area.
So you have 36-inch pipes feed 30-inch pipes right now, and that'll all turn into 36-inch
Correct.
pipes, which is a good, okay, great, thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Ms. Marmion?
So just to be clear, though, we need to do this regardless of development, correct?
Correct.
Because we're having
Right.
issues with the
Yes.
called it I and I. regardless of future development, we
Yes.
need to do this?
Yes, we do.
Okay, thank you.
But while we're doing it, we might as well upsize the pipe to
Absolutely.
accommodate
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
only
Get the
current
grant
More bang for
current
buck.
demand,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
future demand.
I
Right.
got you, thank you.
It's a win-win, right?
Right.
All right, thank you, Ms. Marmion. Ms. Leclerc?
So are we upsizing the pipe enough to cover all potential future development?
Think so.
That's-
Well, is it 15 or 20% is, in terms of sewer capacity, is a pretty good improvement. So we would cover, I'd like to think at least decades, but one never knows, but at least a substantial amount of development.
Yeah.
And then because this is a plan that was approved by TP&Z, there is a developer that's planning on doing this project. Do we have them contribute towards the increased capacity of the sewer line? Are they going to assist us in
So
any
there
way?
was an impact fee assessed as part of Phase 1 for the wetland crossing piece. We've had conversations with the development team with respect to Phase 2, and that's part of the terms and conditions that I'm sure we'll hear from the state as to this particular grant, you know, the developer will need to make some assurances, both to the town as well as to the state, that, you know, provided the money, you know, some project will then ensue, will be as a result of that.
Right.
So that's what the state's looking.
Okay, and then, we had originally asked for a grant of 5 million, but they only gave us 3 million. Is there any potential that we could get in the future any more, or?
Not
likely?
not this round.
Never say
Okay.
never,
Yeah,
but, you know.
yeah. But offhand, when they listed the awards, there was one municipality that had a $100 million project, and I think they got 3 or 5 million. So percentage-wise, I think only one other town beat us. Everybody else was around the 10 to maybe 15% range, and ours is about 30%.
Okay, and by accepting this grant, we're committing then to this project. Even though we don't have funds behind it now, we do have to.
Or and that's for the balance.
Indirectly, yeah,
Yeah.
we
Okay.
are, but if there's some reason, if funding does get turned down, it ends up being controversial, I'm sure, although the state doesn't like it, we could withdraw from the grant, but being that this was a highly competitive grant, and that, as Sheila had mentioned, that we have to do the work anyway, you know, we just happened to hit the timing right on this one.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Leclerc. Any other questions from the board on this item? Okay, great. I see no requests for public comment, so we can move this item to a vote. All those in favor of accepting the Connecticut Community Challenge Grant Round 2 in the amount of $3 million and authorizing the first selectwoman to enter into and execute any and all agreements, contracts, and documents necessary to obtain that grant, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, it is
Aye.
unanimous, 7-0. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
All
you,
right,
thank the
thank you,
team and the sewer
Andrea.
commission as well.
Great
Thank you.
job on this one.
See you, Bill, thanks.
Make you part of our
All
board of
right,
finance.
so we'll move on to item 5.
We do look out
To
for
hear an update
Yeah,
on
sure.
economic development from the Community and Economic Development Director. Can I have a motion to hear this item? Mr. DeWitt, seconded by Ms. Marmion. Welcome back, Mr. Barnhart. Again, thank you so much for being here.
Sure.
I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. For the record, Mark Barnhart, Director of Community Economic Development. I'm going to share with you an abridged version of a report that I provided to the Economic Development Commission earlier this month, this past week, in fact. Hopefully we can just hit the slide show. You were right there, so.
You gotta hit the
Go back-
arrow.
go back
Hit
to the back
top.
arrow.
There you go, sorry.
And then just hit the slideshow right at the top, yeah,
There
from the
you go.
beginning. There you go. Thanks. And we have to screen share. Is it screen shared? Everyone can see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So we can go to the next slide. Next, I'm sorry, I don't have the drive function.
The down arrow will work.
technology. Thank you. Just a brief overview, small but mighty team of 3 people in my office, one of whom administers the Federal Community Development Block Grant on behalf of the town. I do provide staff support not only the Economic Development Commission, but the Affordable Housing Committee, and probably soon, along with Mr. Calabrese, to the Arts Commission as well, possibly to the Fair Rent Commission if one is devised. So I think that's indicative generally of the breadth of responsibilities of the office. Next slide, please. This is our positioning statement. If you ask, business executives to identify key criteria for selecting a business location, among the criteria that they routinely identify are the availability of skilled labor, the quality of the transportation infrastructure to provide proximity to customers and to markets, and particularly for knowledge-based industries, which is companies that we wish to covet, that we covet very highly, the area's quality of life. And I think this pretty much summarizes what Fairfield has to offer within the marketplace. Next slide. So to paraphrase a former Fed chair, the fundamentals of our local economy are quite sound. I think, with all kidding aside, Fairfield obviously has many strengths, among those that I just alluded to in the previous slide, but Fairfield has high-income demographics, thanks to the work of this board and others, strong financial management, a stable tax rate, diverse business base. We're not dependent upon a particular business or company for much of our taxes, tax base, et cetera. But all that aside, we are not an island, and we're experiencing, like the country and the world as a whole, some headwinds. Next slide. Part of it, generally, unemployment being at or near record lows, that's a good thing, right? But it's also indicative of a very tight labor market. You talk to a lot of businesses here and elsewhere. Many are continuing to have trouble finding workers, holding on to workers, and the like. They're also, as you've probably read, dealing with supply chain disruptions. And while some of the inflationary pressures that we've seen are easing just a bit, prices overall across the board are still much higher than where they were a year or two ago. So all this obviously has an effect in terms of the business environment. Obviously, the Fed is keen on bringing inflation under control, so they're raising interest rates, and it obviously has implications for private lending, commercial real estate development, and the like. Next slide, please. More regionally, if we look at where we are positioning within Fairfield County, vacancy rates are generally trending in the right direction, heading downward, but there's still quite a lot of supply on the market, office supply on the market, particularly in Lower Fairfield County. Our portion of the office market is quite small. This is really only accounts for Class A office space, but relative to Stanford, Norwalk, and the like, this is we're a relatively small sub-market. But our office vacancy rates are low, amongst the lowest in the area. If you looked overall across all classes, we're around 10%, and that's generally pretty good. Next slide. I'm sorry. This past year was really a near banner year in terms of construction activity. I look at the building officials' reports on building permits issued, isolate those that have a commercial or institutional component. This does include work at the two universities, which obviously doesn't affect our grand list, but obviously they both have made substantial investments in their on-campus facilities, with new sports arenas opening up, new residence halls and the like, and that's reflected in these numbers. Next slide. And some of those projects that we're currently monitoring, there's been a lot of work. If you drive around town, you'll see construction taking place, some of which is reflected in that prior slide, but some haven't really hit the market yet. We have medical office buildings being constructed across from the Hotel Hi-Ho, new 3-story mixed-use building for a law office downtown with some residential above. very small project. The veterinary hospital, Greenfield Hill Animal Hospital, finally got approved.
Thank God.
Thank God, right? And they're breaking ground, starting construction work there.
That's amazing.
And you'll see, some other residential projects in the midst, anywhere from, right down the street here, the Reef Road, there's 290 residential developments being built. One is a office conversion. There was a medical office building at 321 Reef Road. It's now being converted to 9 units of residential. And then obviously some of the work that's going on at both universities. Next slide. I think this is really important for all of us to keep in mind, and to our conversation before the meeting actually started. Only 4.5% of the town's land mass is actually zoned to support commercial industrial uses, but it's highly productive, and it accounts for 12% of our overall grand list. And it's obviously concentrated along the Post Road, US Route 1, as well as the axes running north on Black Rock Turnpike for the most part. But I think this shows we don't have a lot, so obviously what we have to work with, we have to make efficient, good use of it, right? Next slide. So if land is a finite commodity and we place a high value on what real estate, what land is, we're looking at what's the yield on a per acre basis. And I include this slide just to show across different classes. Some of the larger multifamily and mixed-use developments actually do contribute fairly significantly to our grand list and are among our largest taxpayers on a per unit basis. That's what we're looking at, $6,000 to $7,000 per unit in taxes on these projects. And they compare quite favorably to some of our other, obviously a Whole Foods anchored plaza is significant, but it's on a large piece of real estate there. So it's a one-story development for the most part. Big yield on a tax per square footage, but less so on tax per acre. Same with medical office. So again, I just wanted to put that in some context because I think that's important to remember.
It's a good chart.
We track this periodically. I saw this done for somebody else, and I started
Yeah.
looking at some of our projects just to see what it would pencil out to. And
Yeah.
it's really eye-opening.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I would have never guessed that we're talking about $1 million almost of
Yep.
property tax.
Yep.
That's a really good chart.
Next slide. So I know I can pause here, but I know people probably have some questions about individual development sites. I will take you through a couple of key ones that we're obviously focused on. I'm sure you'll have other questions in terms of other sites or development activities you might be familiar with or have questions about. If we go to the next slide. So we just talked about the crossings at Fairfield Metro. It is approved for 357 residential units, the hotel, 70,000 square feet of office and 40,000 square feet of retail. That was the approved master plan that was back in April of 2020. We do have a new developer, purchased the site back in 2022, earlier in like July, $27 million, which works out to a little over $1.1 million per acre over the 24-acre campus. He has started construction on the first building, building number 4, based on that approved plan, which is a 71-unit development. Phase 1B is the concourse building, which connects to the flyover and includes the hotel and office space. So,
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
You referenced that we only have 4.5% of our
area.
land
Yes,
that's zoned for commercial use.
correct.
So where does the Metro Center fit into that 4.5%? What percentage of Metro Center is that 4.5?
Well, that is, the area around Fairfield Metro is, if you went back to that slide and looked at the big blob, that was our industrial heartland, so that was, before Metro, this was the Bullard's Foundry.
Right.
And, at the heyday, and around World War II, was employing 10,000 people there. So this is a piece of that 4.5%. And obviously, to make it, what the Planning and Zoning Commission has approved is a mixed-use development. So there's a component of commercial as well as a residential, which is important.
So you just said the Phase 1B is starting right now, and that's the hotel?
Well, Phase 1A is
1A,
starting.
I'm sorry.
Phase 1B, and wisely, I think, the Planning and Zoning Commission, when they approved the development plan, they approved a sequencing based on the developer's own plan, and said, you know, made a conditional approval, such that they can't move forward with additional
Until they do
components of
one.
residential until they do a piece of commercial.
So phase 1A is the hotel.
Phase 1B is the hotel.
What's
and
phase 1A?
Phase 1A is the one that's currently being built, the 71 units of residential.
Gotcha.
Right in
Okay.
on Ash Creek.
Gotcha.
And you know, this rendering is an old rendering, so what will happen is that will evolve over time. I know the developer wants to make revisions to the overall master plan. We'll be coming back before the commission, Planning and Zoning Commission, to do that. It's almost a return to what was originally envisioned for the site, not so much in terms of the office. It was approved for 1 million square feet of office space. But in terms of creating a podium on which to develop and structured parking underneath, which makes, again, more efficient use of the land that is currently there.
You know, back to Ms. Marmion's question.
Yep.
This is like, of that 4%, this is like the crown jewel of that 4%,
It is, I
right?
mean,
That
we don't
downtown
have
area
we don't
there,
have a
right?
bigger piece of property than this, right? 24 acres. Now, again, a lot of it is, you know, it has some challenges,
Yeah,
topographical challenges based on how the site was developed and
Right.
was available. So we have to work with that.
Yeah.
Next slide, please, I'm sorry. So this is the other
Yeah.
site. I know, you know, there was some conversation about connecting the sidewalk network, and we're having a hearing down the hall on property across the street that's owned by the same real estate development company, the former Hyundai dealership at 2269. You know, I think this speaks to a larger master plan. I mean, we've met with the development team. They've acquired the property in 2020 after the cleanup was completed. They purchased it for a little over $4.5 million, which, if you're doing the math, that's $700,000 an acre, which is very, very good.
Yeah, it's cheap.
Especially when you talk about a site that does not have an environmental land use restriction on it. It is a irregularly shaped lot. It's long and narrow. It's hemmed in by the river on the side
And the post
heading
road.
towards Southport and the train tracks, but you've got all this frontage on the post road. So clearly there needs to be some commercial component on the post road. It could be residential above. I think that the commission is thinking about mixed use for this site.
Hey,
We've
great.
looked at some renderings, some concept drawings from the development team. They still need to do some additional work, but you know, part of what I do is try to match up, you know, developers. They're not intending to develop it solely themselves. They want to ground lease it to another development entity. So we're trying to play matchmaker and find somebody that's capable of doing this type of quality work that would make the town proud and also add to our grant list.
How long has this been available, Mark?
Well, it really, from 2020 on. So, you know, when they acquired the site in 2020.
Purchased for $4.5 million.
Yep. And at that point, you know, maybe by 2021, they kind of had everything kind of in order. But, you know, this is part of what the frustrating part of the job is, that we don't own or control these sites. We have to work with the people who do. They may have different ideas in terms of what the property is worth, what they want to see in terms of development. Their initial plan, they came to us and suggested something, and we said, we just weren't overly impressed. We said, you're not really leveraging this site. And I think, you know, to our earlier discussion, we don't have a lot of these sites, so we have to use them wisely, right? And this is a very key site between the traditional downtown and Southport, so it would fill in that gap. Next slide.
And access to the train here for cargo is not really an
We
option, is
suggested,
it?
when we were trying to get some grant funds, we suggested this could be TOD. It's really, you know, if you're in Manhattan, 3/4 of a mile is walkable, right? But in
Right.
suburban Fairfield, it's a little different. So
Right.
it is within 3/4 of a mile of the train station. It's on the outer realm of what you would consider TOD, so.
Yeah.
This is another site a little closer to the downtown. I'm sure you're familiar with it. This is the old Fairfield Lumberyard site. It's owned by R.D. Cinto, a well-known developer. Talked to them quite a bit. It is approved for 148 units of age-restricted housing. Originally, that was to be developed by the Jewish home. The Jewish home subsequently backed out, couldn't secure financing, decided that it was not something they wanted to pursue. And now it's on the market again, but you can see what they purchased it for in 2018, $5 million. Again, pretty reasonably priced. They're asking $10.5 million, which is not very reasonably priced and doesn't pencil out.
Yeah, right.
It does not pencil out at 148 units. I've met with literally, I would say, at least a half a dozen respected developers and talked them through some of these issues. And I think at some point we'll reach an equilibrium, but this is a tough site to develop anyway because it's limited access. It's surrounded by tidal wetlands. Everything has to be built on piles, and you have a sewer issue there as well in terms of the existing sewer lateral has to be upgraded, revised. So all this adds to cost, and so I think at 148 units they do the math. It's pretty quick to figure out what they can afford to pay for it. It's not anywhere close to 10 million. I can tell you that right now.
1.6 an acre is a lot, right?
Yeah, yeah. And what they do is they calculate what they can buy the land for per unit, and 148
Sure.
units. And we've said, look, I don't know that there's an appetite to do anything bigger, and age restricted probably works there because you don't have as much car traffic and you're close to the downtown. There's a market for it.
Yeah.
But these are all factors that developers have to weigh.
Is it just approved now just for age restricted?
It is.
So if someone wanted to do something
Someone would
else,
do
they'd
it
have to come
straight,
back.
they'd have to come back, yeah.
Okay.
And I don't know, I don't know if they would have gotten 148 if it wasn't age restricted.
Right.
Next slide, sorry.
Interesting.
There's one before that. So this is next to the train station. This was a property I've been working on for a while. It's owned by an individual who lives in Florida. No disrespect to anyone who's been in Florida, but he's a very eccentric guy. He made a lot of money. He's not particularly motivated to do anything with this site. The building was demolished at one point, so we just have a pad that's on there. It is a brownfield site. It was part of the Bullard's Foundry, so there are remediation issues that have to be dealt with as part of the development plan. Among the groups that I talked to was the Post Road Residential, who developed the Anchorage downtown, and Andy Montelli, is a respected developer, lives in town. I talked to him among other folks about this particular site. He was able to get a deal with the owner of the property, put it under contract. As happenstance, the owner had reached out to me previously and said, I'm thinking of cleaning up this site. And I said, well, why would you do that? Why don't you just sell it to somebody who would clean it up as part of the development process? And that's sort of the conversation going. But they just went before TP&Z and they proposed a concept plan for the site. TP&Z, I think, responded favorably to it, so I think they'll come back with a formal application in the next few months. So, more residential, but again, this feeds into that sewer. But it's right next to the train station.
Right.
The front part is actually a little bit in the flood zone too, so there's going to be a public, what they propose to address that is to keep the development outside of that and make a public space, public amenity space, which I think the Planning and Zoning Commission responded to favorably as well.
I'm
Next
curious
slide.
about you talk about this as zone for industrial. Are there no industrial interests in Fairfield?
The problem is that the industrial interests can't pay what the land is worth.
Yeah.
So,
For a warehouse,
I
you
get
already
people
have.
that, I just got an inquiry today from somebody who's looking for warehouse distribution space,
Yeah.
80 to 100,000 square feet. But when we crunch the numbers, they can't come anywhere close. They're looking at, $5 to $10 a square foot.
Right.
Sure.
We haven't seen that in town in
Yeah.
decades. So I usually end up referring them to some folks in Bridgeport or Stratford or,
Sheldon?
elsewhere. Next slide, sorry. And this is the other, I should say albatross, but the what's left of the former Handy and Harmon site. You know, the Whole Foods anchored retail plaza is across the street where the manufacturing
It's across the street from Home
facility
Depot
was.
and all that, right?
It's right next to Home Depot, which was McKesson before
Yeah.
Home Depot. McKesson used to be there. And, you know, this site was where they took the wastewater from the precious metals processing and they treated it there.
Oh,
So you can imagine this site is really contaminated.
Wow.
And it flows in the back portion of, like 2/3 of this site are wetlands. It flows into Turney Creek. So it's, you got wetlands and a severely contaminated brownfield site.
Wow.
And a publicly traded company that's not anxious to put this on their balance sheet. So they're under consent order, but DEP has 1,000 of these sites. And so it's this constant game that we play to try to get it up on the top of the stack to get DEP to, you know, tell them to do something else. So this is out 5, 10 plus years in terms of development. The only thing that might change that, we've had periodic interest from developers, and probably the best use I can envision currently for this site is self-storage, honestly, because it's in a hole next to the
There's
tracks.
self-storage to the, whatever
We
direction
have-
that is over there.
We
right?
have a lot of demand for self-storage, and people are looking at these sites that really don't want self-storage on. But this site would be actually pretty good for that.
It's a great access.
The retail, we've had retail inquiries too, but the retail piece is, I don't think it'll make enough here, you know, generate enough there. But
It's a huge site, 9.4 acres. I would never.
but only
guessed.
about two and a half is actually developed.
Oh, is that right?
Well,
Yeah.
you know, if you saw a better
Wetlands.
picture, the parking lot is probably the area you can develop.
Yeah.
So that's the nutshell. We did talk about 355, you can go to the next slide, which is the 355 Kings Highway, which is the Miller Volkswagen site. We've been talking to the owner of that property, which is no longer Paul Miller, about, you know, it's DiNardo, about developing that site. It was approved previously.
DiNardo?
Yeah, Sal and Peter. So it was approved for 40 units and like 20,000 square foot of retail way back when. But the issues there are, it's in a floodplain and they have the contamination they have to contend with. So, you know, it's trying to navigate between DEP, two divisions of DEP, the one that's concerned about the floodplain and the other group that's concerned about the remediation issues. So we've had a meeting with them, but it's taking very long.
How did the,
DEP, that is.
how did the car dealership get the approval to begin with, if that was
I
the
don't
issue?
know, it was a long time ago.
It
so,
was,
yeah,
right, but it's
yeah.
also been vacant for a long time, right? So.
Yep. Paul, you know, even when he had it there with cars, it would flood regularly, and they'd have to move their cars to avoid, you know, having damage. But from what I understand, the PCB contamination predates his ownership.
Oh, is that right?
Can we get a copy? This is really good, by the way.
Yeah, I'm happy
Love
to
to-
provide that.
love to get a
Yep.
copy of it,
I'll make
yeah.
sure that it gets
That'd
out
be
to all
great.
of you, yeah.
Yeah, very
And
good.
if you wanted to see a bigger version of it, it's on the economic development, yeah.
Oh, is it? Okay.
So I'm happy to take any other questions. Hopefully, I touched on the highlights at least.
Just, I'd like to take your temperature in terms of, you've been with the town for how long now?
Almost 20 years, yeah.
Almost 20 years.
Yep.
So just give us some perspective in terms of, are you optimistic about where Fairfield is going in terms of economic development? Just give us your.
I am always
I
optimistic
know
about
you
Fairfield.
have to be, you're a salesman, but just in terms of
No,
what
I
you're seeing
think-
right now and having presented this to us.
No, if you look back at the construction activity, which you'll see peaks and valleys, right? And I think we've had a couple up years where we've seen a lot of construction activity. And you see some of the headwinds that we're talking about from not anything that we're doing locally, but nationally.
Yeah.
And all that has an impact. So I do anticipate that it may be harder, those projects that are marginal,
Take some time.
that are not gonna go forward
Right.
with, rising interest rates, the cost of materials, everything associated with that. So, and that may not be such a bad thing, to have those projects kind of put on the sideline for now. But I think those that are currently in the hopper will move ahead. you know, I think there's a lot to be bullish about here. I mean, again, it goes back to the fundamentals. The underlying fundamentals are so strong for Fairfield. We don't have some of the issues that other communities in the state do, and we should be, you know, thankful for that. And I think the things that we can control are our own land use and permitting process. And so much of what I do is try to interpret our land use regulations to developers and try to match the two.
Right.
And we're going through a process now. We're updating our plan of conservation development. I think that is really critical because it's helpful not just for me and for staff, other staff, but the developers as well, people that want to invest in this community. They don't want to fight. They want to know what they can do. So we can be very clear about what we want to see happen on individual sites or areas of town. I think generally, you know, people will try to heed that advice. So I think this is a really critical time to update our POCD, our plan of conservation development, our zoning regs at the same time.
And, I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. You good? So I'm sure, not just myself, but a lot of people here get, you know, the postcards from real estate salespeople, right?
Mhm.
About home values.
Sell your house, yeah.
Sell your house and
Yep.
home values.
Yep.
I got one in particular yesterday, and it was basically comparing Fairfield to other towns. So I'm just curious, do you kind of gauge, like, let's say what a Westport would do? Because the difference between Fairfield and Westport, according to this flyer, it was fairly dramatic in terms of house values. I was actually kind of shocked. So I know there's a combination of a lot of factors. I understand that the BOE factors,
Yep.
probably number one would be.
The biggest
probably
thing is
the Board of
proximity
Ed.
to New York City. As you get
Exactly.
closer to New York City, the land values and housing values go up.
Right, but they're a neighbor town, so I
Yep.
just was curious if there's a,
They don't have diversity of housing stock, though.
they don't want, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just,
No, I would
They don't
agree
have
with you.
diversity
They don't
of
have the
housing
same
stock.
diversity of housing
So
stock.
the
Not that we
point
get a
of
whole lot
entry-
of credit for it, but,
right,
you know, in the
point of
eyes of the
entry
state.
to buy a house in
Yeah.
Fairfield versus Westport, there's no comparison. That's my perspective, I'm not.
No, I
messing
just
that up.
wondered from an economic
Yeah, just
development
diversity.
perspective, taking the house value thing out of it, I just thought of it because of the price difference, but is there like I'm guessing an organization you belong to where you share ideas or like implement suggestions, those kinds of things?
Sure, I mean, there's a statewide economic development association. I'm on the board, I'm the treasurer. So, you know, we do meet regularly and share a lot of information that's helpful. I don't focus as much on the residential real estate
Right, no, I
side
understand.
as the commercial real estate side, but obviously, you know, as we've demonstrated, residential development can sometimes be economic, it is economic development, right?
Right.
So,
It has a component, yeah.
so we do have to be attuned to the changes in the local real estate market. You know, I also, you know, provide staff support to affordable housing, and we're, you know, that group is very keenly focused on what the median house value is in Fairfield and how many houses are selling at an affordable rate, and it's, you know, it's a very small fraction. So there's a lot of things to unpack there, but yeah, we do try to benchmark ourselves a little bit against and see what other
yeah,
communities are doing and what we can do differently
I
or
noticed this
better.
worked for you, for your town, for economic development.
Well, Westport doesn't even have economic
Well,
development.
what I'm
so-
saying is, not just them,
Yeah.
but other towns in particular. So,
Greenwich
That's
too.
Greenwich doesn't, I was just gonna say,
Greenwich-
Greenwich doesn't have one either. right?
It does not. It works, they have a volunteer economic development commission, but we'd all be very happy to have their grant list, wouldn't we? So,
Yeah, exactly.
but, you know, it is very much a factor of their proximity to New York. And as you go out, land values and house values get cheaper the further out you get from the city. That's probably
And
factor
taxes
number
are
one.
Also,
What's that?
and taxes, you know, go
Taxes
hand in
do
hand
hand
with
in
that.
hand,
Yeah,
so, yeah.
look at it that way.
Yep. Thank you,
Okay.
thank you.
I just want to be cognizant of our time. I think, Mark, we could probably,
Probably.
this topic obviously
Thank
has a
you.
lot of interest, and I feel like maybe we should see you more than once a year. if that's
I can
okay.
come back,
Maybe
if,
quarterly.
certainly if there's questions, I'm happy to come back.
Yeah, I think it would be terrific if maybe, you know, twice a
Quarterly.
year, we could just get a quick update from you, because
Sure.
a lot of what you're talking about ultimately all of these things will have a direct or indirect financial impact on the town, and that's, aside from our own curiosity, those are all, I know that's important to all of us. So, do we have a couple more, Mr. DeWitt?
Well, first off, I want to thank you. This was great. This is one of the best economic development briefs probably ever I've seen. I want to thank the chairwoman for letting us kind of free form it here. So appreciate that. And I also want to thank our chairwoman for scheduling this and taking the advice of the board and the budget committee recommendation to have departments like economic development come in here, smattering of you through the year rather than just bogging down the budget process. So
I appreciate that.
Thank you for scheduling this as the first one, because I think this is a great representation of where we'll save a lot of time in budget process.
Great.
So
Thank you.
So thank you, Madam Chair.
Absolutely, yeah, I think it was really valuable. So again, thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you.
And if no one else has any more questions, we can move on. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
All right. I do want to echo Mr. DeWitt's comments. I absolutely think we should, this was sort of prompted by the budget discussion, but definitely something we should think about in other areas. Okay, so we are going to move on to item 6, which is to hear an update on the Recreation Revolving Fund. Can I have a motion to hear this item? Mr. DeWitt, seconded by Ms. Marmion. The materials for this item begin on page 38 of the posted backup online. Mr. Anthony Calabrese, Director of Parks and Recreation, is here to take us through this. Welcome, Mr. Calabrese. And I don't know how you were planning to kind of walk through this, but maybe before you jump into any detail, if you can just give, I think it's been a number of years since the board had the overview of the revolving fund. So if you can just maybe give some background on how the fund works, and how programs, revenue structures and non-program expenses are authorized through this fund, I think that would be helpful, given that they are sort of outside the budget process.
Sure, I'm happy to do so. Anthony Calabrese, Director of Parks and Recreation. Happy to talk about our revolving fund. So revolving fund was set up essentially as a startup fund for the recreation programming. We were given $200,000, again, as startup money to run all our programs that are outside of the budgeting process. So you should have the list in front of you. You'll see all kinds of things on there, from summer camp to soccer to preschool programming to cooking classes to yoga. You name it, it's pretty much on here. What we do is we run from October 1st through September 30th each year, and anything that we generate that's above and beyond the $200,000 goes back to the general fund, and that gets swept October 1st. So for example, the one that you're looking at right now is the current budget that we're in, but this is, for our all intents and purposes, these are our programs that just ended this past year. So you'll see once we back out the $200,000 that we end up kicking back $170,000 to the general fund, which was over the $100,000 that we anticipated making, which was great. It means we had a really good year in programming. They're not always that way. When we had COVID, obviously we had a complete zero, which was heartbreaking. But that happens occasionally. But that is essentially how the fund operates. As far as expenditures and things of that nature, we follow the town guidelines on all purchasing things. So anything that we're going to spend that's going to be over $3,000, we have to get 3 quotes for. If it's above $15,000, we would go out to bid, with exception to really specific items like summer camps. Field trips would be an exception to that rule. You can't put out to bid a quasi-field trip. Right, so I mean that's a really good example of an exception to that. But yeah, I mean, I'm happy to walk through anything on here. Like I said, this matches the $170,000 change matches the Q1 update that we had given you guys, because we knew at that point this is where we ended. So, but yeah, you'll see on on the far right columns all the nets from the program. So essentially, what I'll do is I'll look at this sheet and see if there's any programs that are losing money. Obviously, my programmers know that off the top of their head when they're responsible for a specific program. There's some programs that we know are money makers right off the bat. Summer camps are where we're going to make our money. And the way we look at that, if we have a program that's losing money, and I think a really good one to point out, or two good ones to kind of point out here, is adaptive recreation. That's a summer camp that we run for kids that have special needs. Most of those kids have a one-on-one. We are never going to make money on that program, and we are perfectly okay losing money on that program because we know we're offering a great service and a value to the community. So, playground camp will make extra money. We know that we're covered there. So that's how we look at that one. Another one that this year it made money was teen theater. In years past, we've lost $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 on that program. This year we made money, which was good. And a lot of times that has to do with the show that they choose to put on, the show that they choose to produce. When you get a very popular show, Les Mis, things like that, we can get more than just the parents to come to the show. You'll get people from the community that'll come and buy tickets. Sometimes we get a little sidetracked from that and we go with an obscure show that might not be the best, and we end up paying for it. But again, a loss like that gets offset by some of our other programming. The other big thing to point out in here is all our credit card fees throughout the recreation department, regardless of what the program is, all those fees come out of this account. So you'll see a line on the second page of $208,000. Seems like a lot of money, but you're talking $2 million worth of revenue that had come in. So in the whole scheme of things, our rate is really low. That rate did go out to bid maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and we switched the town switched vendors that who handled our credit card processing. So we went from like 5.5%. I believe we're 2.5% across the board, but don't quote me on that. But I believe that's it. But all the programs here are self-sustaining, and we build in that credit card fee into all our pricing. So.
All right. Thank you. Mr. DeWitt, I see
Sheila's like, you have to really put your arm so you can say it. That 208,000 is for all of Parks and Rec.
Correct.
So it's not 208 over 2 million. It's 208 over
like 6
or 7
yeah.
million, right?
But
so that's not bad.
Yeah, no, it's not bad at all. Like I said, when we switched to a different vendor, we saved a lot of money.
Yeah.
But yeah, this covers golf. We don't charge
golf.
marina, but yeah, golf's the other big one where people like to use credit cards.
Yeah. No, that's great. I think that's a great place for these credit card funds, because where else would you collect it where you're not showing a decremental loss to any individual? I mean, you could put it against a golf course,
Yeah.
that part, but no, this is great. And I had, looking at this earlier, I immediately thought the same thing you did. There's some losing programs in here, but there's some programs that make so much money that we can afford to lose for the betterment of the community, right?
Yep.
So this is great. This is a great overview. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Ms. LeClaire?
It's kind of a theory question that I guess I want to ask Mr. Calabrese, and that is, how does he decide, what should go through this fund versus, our budget? And so it would be, the credit card fees, or I see, field repairs, and definitely when you use the fields and have it run through here, I see why you need to repair them. And I guess, how do we decide where they should go? And
Yeah, so most of the time, we keep this strictly to programming expenses and programming revenue. Occasionally, if I have something come up where, hey, a tennis net, I think is a good example of, it got ripped down or it got vandalized, and I might not have any money remaining in the operating budget, well, we offer tennis programs, so I justify it by, well, I've got to replace the tennis net, so I'm going to put that in the field improvement line here, and that's what it is. So that, I don't know the number off the top of my head. 50,000 in field improvements is not one. That's not like it's one specific project. That's probably 20
many
little
different things.
things.
Okay.
Yeah.
So small things so you can run your program.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And the same thing, I guess you probably have equipment in here to replace things that get worn out and broken and whatever, to a
Yes.
certain extent. Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. And then the larger things, like if you wanted to create a new program or those would go through the budget then?
No.
Or no, not
No,
necessarily?
if it's a program, it's going to go through here. So
Okay.
if we wanted to start
Pickleball.
pickleball or crochet
Cornhole.
or cornhole, exactly,
Start cornhole.
that would go through here. And we would build our budget where figure out our expenses and then figure out what to charge. And the philosophy that we have, or that we've always had, really is we want to break even with a program. If we can offer a program to the community and break even, that's a win. The more I bump up that number in the revenue line during the budget process, like this past year it was $100,000, well, I've got to keep that in mind when I'm doing these budgets. Well, you know what, guys, we might have to bump something else up because we need to cover that $100,000. Because at no time do I ever want to come back here and say, guys, I didn't make the number. So that's our thought here. Yeah, you see, cornhole was a recent one that started. It was a good program, but.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Leclerc. Mr.
Thank you.
Testani?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Hey, Anthony, how are you? I just real curious on concerts. Why was it not attended? Did they not run? I just
Nope.
wondered.
So concerts we offer 42 concerts throughout the summer from Memorial Day to Labor Day.
Right.
A number of years ago, we used to carry this full amount of roughly $25,000 in our operating budget. We reduced that down to $18,000.
And
So
reduced down to 18 in the operating
in the
budget.
operating budget. So we
Okay.
still pay for $18,000 worth of concerts out of the operating budget, and we pay for the other $24,000 out of the 124 account. So it really, I don't want to say it was, basically, taking from one account and paying for another, but there were some years, again, this was probably a good 10 years ago, where we needed to cut the budget, but they didn't want to cut the number of concerts that we were offering for the community. So they said, just cover it out of your revolving, and that was what we did.
And why is it, I'm just struggling to understand why it's showing a deficit, right, of 24,000?
Yeah, there's no revenue. Those are free concerts.
Free- Oh, right, okay,
Yep.
gotcha, okay.
Those are at like the
And-
Sherman Green.
Right, yeah. And just again, just curious about, you mentioned that if programs are running in a deficit, is there a certain dollar amount that you set or your department sets to say, okay, this didn't work for the last couple of years, we haven't made revenue, we're gonna eliminate this? Or-
No, there's not normally a dollar amount, because most of the programs are never going to get into the thousands of dollars. We're not going to lose thousands of dollars on a program.
You
But
might lose a few hundred.
we
here
might
and
lose a
there,
few
maybe
hundred,
a
right.
thousand
And
or
so
whatever,
typically-
like softball on
right,
Wednesdays
so
as an
typically,
example.
so the softball ones are interesting. So we're not really losing money. That's more of a timing thing, and when the umpires send in the bills to get the umpiring league and we pay them. So there may have been some I don't want to say double dipping, but we may have paid bills in October that really were from like September, and it would have been caught in the other
Right.
year, but
Gotcha. Okay.
it crossed over. So I don't worry too much about the softball leagues, because I know that the sponsor fees are covering all those fees. But if we were running like badminton or something, and it wasn't making money, it lost a couple $100s, and there were only a few people registered, I would say, hey, let's run it again. Maybe we look at the day we're offering it. Maybe we look at where we're offering it. Maybe we look at the fee we're offering and try to revamp it that way. If we lose money again, or it doesn't take off after the second time, then it's kind of like, oh, okay, maybe we'll do it one more time, because we're getting people that are saying, hey, we really want it. Well, you got to sign up for it. And if they don't sign up for it the third time,
Right.
that's where I pull the plug. We move on.
And that 55,000 on the next page on recreation, seasonal brochure, I believe it is, that's this?
That's that.
That goes
Yeah, so that goes
to-
out 3 times a year.
And I just got mine today too.
Yeah.
It just hit hot off the press.
Okay.
So those just hit,
Okay.
and we do that 3 times a year. So
Goes out to every resident, I believe, correct?
yeah, 23,000 households.
Okay, very good. Oh, this is great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, 23,000,
All right,
that's cheap.
thank you.
Really
Mr.
is.
Testani, Mr.
Very
Curley?
reasonable.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Anthony, thanks for coming tonight. I just had a question, no surprise. I have a question about on the second page of your sheet, you've got the golf memorial benches. That program started with the golf courses, but that's expanded beyond the golf courses, right? You've got that at the marina and at some of the parks. Is that just a mislabel?
It's definitely a mislabel because it should just be memorial benches, but like you said, it started with the golf
Right.
course, so it's still labeled golf memorial benches in our munis system. And the deficit is, those run at cost. The deficit was,
Right.
we decided when we were having supply chain issues to order in advance, so we ordered 10 additional ones without having them sold already, knowing that we're going to fly through those, and I don't want somebody to come to me and say, hey, I want to put a memorial bench in, and I say, hey, I can't get it for 6 months. So we have,
Right.
that's why this one time we're in the hole there.
Yeah, and for the benefit of the public and the rest of the board, you know, the intent of that program, if I remember correctly, was to come up with a standardized park bench that could be used initially around the golf course. The Parks and Rec ran with that. You're seeing the same benches are at the marina, at some of the parks. It's offered to the public so that they can memorialize a family or friend and with a bronze plaque on the park bench, but it gives the town an opportunity to replace old benches, put new benches in place where benches didn't occur, weren't there before, as Anthony mentioned, at virtually no cost to the town. So it's even though it's running a deficit here, I think generally speaking, if we weren't offering this to the public to get out there, the town would have to incur expense to replace these benches or put benches out anyway. So I just wanted to confirm that was beyond just the golf course there. So thank you.
You're welcome.
So individuals pay for those?
They do.
benches?
I think the price now is $1,500.
Yeah. There's a couple at Penfield, they're beautiful.
Yeah,
They're-
we have them
they're
at
really-
Penfield, we have them along some of the parks on the Post Road, we have them
Yeah,
at Jennings. The
yeah.
marina is loaded with them, I don't think I have much space left there anymore.
No, they're
But
beautiful
they're
benches.
nice, they are.
And it is, Craig's right, it's nice that it's consistent, that you don't see a blue one here or a green one.
Yep.
They all look very consistent and the plaques are beautiful, so.
Thank you.
$1,500.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. My screen just did something funny, so I can't see everyone in the room.
CEO.
So if anyone has a hand up, but I think I'm going to ask a question if I can. Anthony, the big line item on here in the middle of the page is labeled playground.
Yep.
And it's $624,000 of revenue. What is that?
That's our playground camp, that's our largest summer camp, about 4,000 kids throughout the summer. It's the
So
element.
that's the summer camp.
Yep, that's the elementary
Okay.
school kids.
Got it, okay. And can you also just briefly remind us of the role of the Parks and Rec Commission in this process? Are they, do they approve rate structures for these programs, et cetera?
Not for these programs typically. These are all done in-house with office staff. Parks and Rec Commission normally approves marina rates. They approve our beach sticker rates. They approve,
Golf.
Golf Commission does golf rates. But yes. Things of that. They set the tennis center rates for the lease we have down with the tennis center at the Bubble. They do set those. They weigh in on the summer rates there.
Food vendors, they set those rates?
No, they do sign. No, 'cause those typically go out to bid. But those are pretty much the big ones. If there's something, if the playground camps is a good example. Typically, what I would do if we were going to raise rates at playground camp, I would bring that to the board and just let them know and make sure that they're on board with it. But I don't typically ask for a vote on that rate because it's a program that's done in-house.
Got it, okay, thank you for that.
Yep.
Other questions from the board? All right, So just one last question for you, Anthony, just to make sure I have this technically right. So the $170,000 that's due to the general fund.
Yep.
Is that equivalent to the number that you would have budgeted for this fiscal year, and you would have estimated that $170,000, last spring?
That's correct.
Or do you, okay,
No, that's correct. So so in our current budget that we're looking at now, fiscal 23, I think the number was 100, might be 100 and change, is what I budgeted. This money got collected on October 1st when the account got swept. So
Got it.
it's 170. So we're 70 over, which is what I believe we reported at Q1, or we should have anyway.
yeah, that makes sense. So you estimate this based on everything you know, all your expectations about how programs are gonna run.
Exactly.
Whatever, 6 months after budget season, and then we get that actual.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you again for that.
You're welcome.
Other questions from the board? All right. Well, thank you again for,
Thank you.
Thank you.
for coming in person, even
Thanks,
though I'm not there in person.
I'm staying home next time.
Thank you.
It's nice to see you.
Thanks, Anthony. Summer camp's always been part of the revolving fund?
No.
All right, so we are going to move on to item 7,
Large dollar.
which is to hear an update on internal audit from the town auditor. Can I have a motion to hear this item? Mr. DeWitt, seconded by Ms. Leclerc. All right, so the materials for this item begin on page 40 of the posted backup. They are fairly extensive, but on page 40, there's a helpful index of what's in the backup, including a listing of all of the internal audits completed during the year. The DPW audit report, which will be referenced during the discussion, isn't included in the backup because it's been previously provided to the board, but there is a link to the report on page 40. So with that, I want to welcome Ms. Connie Saxel
Thank
to
you.
take us through the material.
Thank you,
Connie,
Lori.
turn it over to you. And Connie, let me just, I guess I'll leave this up to you, but given that, normally we have you for the whole meeting and it's already 9 p.m. I don't know if you want to maybe hold off on maybe if you want to jump into the internal audit reports, and maybe you can review the list of your other activities later if we have time for that. Would that be okay?
Yes, that's perfectly fine.
Okay, thank you.
Will do. Good evening, everyone, and Happy New Year. I'm Connie Saxel, the Town Internal Auditor. And tonight, I am presenting a report of internal audit work conducted for the 12-month period commencing January 1 through December 31st, 2022. And during this time, there were 9 internal audits performed. Regular follow-up reviews were conducted to monitor compliance with the DPW Independent Audit Report findings and recommendations. 2 town policies were written, and 1 policy was updated and distributed to town employees. Further, a variety of financial and accounting work was conducted during this time as well. Just a little background. Final internal audit reports are distributed to the Chief Fiscal Officer, the department head, and other appropriate parties directly involved in the audit after draft reviews and discussions are held. Recommendations made within the final internal audit reports are discussed with department heads and tracked internally on a matrix for compliance. And typically, department heads adhere and comply to the audit recommendations as soon as they are notified of them. Sometimes this occurs even before the audit report is finalized. Audit recommendations are followed up through emails with department heads, sample testing, interviews with department staff, on-site physical observations of office practices, as well as review of applicable reports and other associated documents to confirm compliance. I'll briefly recap each of the audit reports for you and discuss the most important audit recommendations where internal controls needed to be implemented or strengthened. And please feel free to ask questions at the end of each audit synopsis. Building Department online permit revenue. Revenue generated from customer payments received for online permits issued by the Building Department from January 8, 2022, which was the inception of the online program, through March 9, 2022 was examined, along with corresponding internal controls. It was recommended for state reporting purposes that the monthly annual report obtained from the Municity database be used to obtain the construction value for all permits issued over the required period needed, rather than adding these values manually from individual reports on a daily basis. This will eliminate the manual task of gathering data that can easily and readily be obtained through the Municity software program. The department head agreed and complied. Secondly, it was recommended that the department head review the detail M5 permit report on a weekly basis to ensure that the proper construction value has been entered and the correct fee has been collected for all permits issued by the department. Any anomalies should be researched and corrected. Adherence to this recommendation will strengthen internal controls over permits issued, fees collected, and reduce the potential for possible losses in revenue. The department agreed and complied. Does anyone have any questions on the building department online permit revenue? Oh, very good. I will move on to the next one. Registrar of Voters. Review of pink postcard mailing and seasonal and part-time payroll process. A pink postcard was created and mailed to 100 randomly selected voters by Matthew Wagner, Registrar of Voters, in November 2021. Per Mr. Wagner, he was conducting a sample mailing to determine how many voters would be interested in a program that allowed them to request that their names and addresses be treated as confidential for public records for their safety. As a consequence of this sample mailing, the Secretary of State notified the town of Fairfield that the pink postcard mailing activity was not within the purview of the Registrars of Voters Office's statutory authority. A review of 2 emails dated March 23rd and 2022 from the Connecticut Secretary of State, Staff Attorney Aida Carini, revealed that she had instructed the Registrar's Office on February 3rd, 2022 to send a corrective letter to the 100 voters who had received the pink postcard mailing, along with the official Secretary of State form. It was recommended that the Registrars of Voters immediately send out the corrective letter and the official state form to the 100 voters as instructed by the Connecticut Secretary of State, Staff Attorney Aida Carini, and Town Attorney James Baldwin. It was further recommended that the Registrars of Voters obtain prior approval from the state of Connecticut for any proposed future mailings which may be considered atypical or outside of the realm of typical standard acceptable department mailing. Only state-approved authorized forms and pre-formatted sample letters offered by the state should be used by the Registrars of Voters for these types of mailings. Sample test-based mailings to a random group of individuals should not be conducted, but rather should be made without bias to all individuals on the Connecticut voter registration list. All individuals on the Connecticut voter registration list should be treated equally and have the same opportunities available to each person. Mr. Wagner did not respond to follow-up audit inquiries regarding compliance with the aforementioned audit recommendations. Do you have any questions regarding this?
I'm sure I have the same one Jack does. So I'll let you ask it.
Mr. Tastani?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, a couple things. First of all, welcome. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Nice to see you
for
too.
coming.
Thank you.
So, the initial postcard, had Mr. Wagner informed anyone other than perhaps someone in the Register of Voters office that this pink postcard was going to be distributed, or was that?
No, I believe it was just conducted within the purview of the Registrar of Voters office.
So no town officially didn't inform our chief fiscal
No.
officer, didn't inform the first select woman?
No.
And so when was the request submitted to Mr. Wagner, your request, and that he hasn't replied to, and has there been follow-up since then?
I sent an email to Mr. Wagner asking him if what the status was of the audit recommendations in October, and did not receive any reply. I did speak to Attorney Baldwin, who is working with the Registrars of Voters and the state attorney, Connecticut Secretary of State Staff Attorney Aida Carini, in resolving this issue.
When you say he's working to resolve the issue, help me to understand that. What do you mean by that? Like, what are they doing
He has
specifically?
has met with Mr. Wagner, he has spoken with the state.
Mr. Baldwin has.
Yes, Mr. Baldwin has.
Okay.
Spoken with Secretary of State Attorney, Staff Attorney Aida Carini, also with Mr. Wagner, and is working towards rectifying this situation.
Is that since your email in October?
Yes.
And
Well,
has the-
throughout the year, he has been working on this since I submitted my audit report.
Right, but my concern is why he wouldn't have responded to your email in October. Is there any?
Mr. Wagner?
Yes.
I do not know why
And
he
did
did
you
not
follow,
receive any
send a follow-up
response.
email since then? This is, gonna be February pretty soon.
Yeah, I know. I did submit the official report to him. He submitted a response to me, which I attached to a final report, and then spoke to Attorney Baldwin, who was working on this situation of rectifying the corrective letter and a new mailing to the 100 individuals. And so I left it in the hands of Attorney Baldwin.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay,
You're
thank you,
welcome.
Mr. Testani. Can I ask a question, Ms. Saxel? Are you aware of any, are there any ramifications for the town in terms of any, financial liability or anything like
Yeah,
that? I mean,
liability.
it's a compliance issue, I understand that, but is there any risk to the town related to this item that you're aware of?
Not that I am aware of. Are you, Mr.?
No,
Schmidt?
not aware of any financial consequences.
Okay, all right, so we do have a compliance issue, and as you said, you're working with, or Attorney Baldwin is involved.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Other questions, Mr. DeWitt?
Yes, thank you, and thank you for this audit and the others I'm sure you're gonna present.
Thank you.
First off, you've mentioned registrars a couple of times. It's really registrar. There's no S on the end of that, right? Because it's not the registrar's office that is the issue here. It's a single registrar. Is that not correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
It was primarily one registrar
Okay.
that had created the mailing and had sent
Not
out
the office of the registrars, it's one person, right?
Correct. It
Okay.
had evolved out of the registrar's office.
No,
But
understand.
was primarily the creation of one registrar.
Got it. And I don't know who to ask this question, maybe you know. Ms. Charlton and I are involved in purchasing policies, right? Which is hopefully gonna put tie a lot of our policies together. But I wonder, is there any policy written in the town that says you can't just ignore an audit finding? I wonder if that's written anywhere, because, you're doing a lot of good work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this, I read through some of the audits, and there's other ones in there that I really think need to be answered in a timely manner, right? And I wonder, is that written in the code of conduct? Is there anything that specifically says can't ignore audit findings? It's not like we just pay Connie to write these things down, everybody ignores them.
Well, I mean.
Well, you're the lawyer in the room.
I don't think there's anything written that says that. I just think department heads and employees working with Connie have to act in good faith. And it would be incumbent upon our chief fiscal officer and the first select woman, or whoever the first select person is to, make sure that employees they comply with audit findings. So, because they're actually in charge, the first select person is,
Yeah.
so.
Can I just
Right.
tell off Mr. DeWitt's, this is an elected position.
No, I'm talking about
correct?
general.
No, I
Yeah,
understand.
yeah.
But let me-
This is a unique
It's a
situation.
little different.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, so you're exactly right.
And
Yeah.
I think, as my understanding could be, that I believe the only recourse may be, some kind of request to have some ethics commission involvement. That would be, and then ultimately removal from office if it's that egregious of a I'm not saying this is. I'm just saying, I'm trying to
Yeah,
think of a
no,
way
I'm with
that
you.
an elected official, whoever it might be, would have to respond to an internal auditor. If they don't, what is the recourse, as you're saying?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I just want to jump in. I share the concern that Mr. DeWitt raised, which is that, responding to and complying to internal audit recommendations should not be optional. And I actually have a more significant concern on another audit that's been done.
Yeah.
This one, to Mr. Testani's point, is a little trickier because this is not simply a department head or an employee, it's an elected official. And I think, there is state statute here. I don't think we're going to debate what the appropriate resolution to this is. I think that's, we have to rely on the guidance of Mr. Baldwin and obviously the Connecticut Secretary of State. So this one is a little bit different. So I just want to point that out. But I do share the concern. I think that when audits are completed, there should not be an option to simply disagree with or not respond to a finding. If there is a disagreement, that's typically worked out between the auditor and the department head, if there's either a factual disagreement or a disagreement on the correct approach to resolve it, so that you have resolution when an audit report is finalized with management's comments. So, but as I said, I'm not sure where this one goes. I think it's in the right hands with Mr. Baldwin. And again, I think we also have state statute that's at play here. So I'm not sure it's a town issue in terms of kind of removal of an elected, official from office. I'm guessing that there is state statute that probably supersedes, anything that we might be speculating on here. And I'm actually not comfortable speculating on it because I don't know enough about it, but I'll just leave it at that.
well, my question, even though I think Mr. Testani's point is very valid, this is an elected official, and this might be a little peculiar, right? Is there a document, is there some document that does cover the fact that audit findings and the recommendations are not optional? And can we ask that question of the town attorney? Maybe it's a state statute, I don't know. Forget elected officials.
There's not a document like that,
No.
Chris. I think we have a requirement for an internal auditor in our charter. I think normally best practices prevail, and to Mr. Matola's point, people are expected to act in good faith and respond to the recommendations. And, I think that to the extent that these impact financial matters for the board, I think we would absolutely take a deeper dive into understanding and maybe bringing officials before us that are responsible for complying. In this case, given that it's more of a, I don't want to say HR, but compliance / HR matter, I think the town attorney's involvement and his communication with the Secretary of State is, it's in the right place.
Okay.
I
got it.
Madam Chair. So the depending on the severity of whatever the violation was, whether it's purchasing policy or any other policy, administration always has the authority to take action against that person if they're violating one of our policies. And you can imagine and see some of it playing out now, the spectrum of what those violations could be, and the consequences related. So whether or not it's written in the purchasing policy, we can take action. We can
absolutely
elevate it and go through the HR department.
We don't have a policy on this, Jared. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's exactly.
I'm just speaking generally. I think this is a very, like you said and like we've all said, this is a very unique situation in this case.
Right. And maybe it speaks to the need to have better policies, and we've talked about this before, whether it's around code of conduct, ethics. Some of those things may ultimately have to be resolved in our charter, but this is not simply a violation of policy. There wasn't a town policy. There was apparently a state statute that this ran afoul of, And so that's where the matter is being addressed, as I
Right.
understand it.
I was
And
just
Mr.
responding to
Curley,
Mr. DeWitt's
and-
question about
and-
policy,
John.
purchasing policy.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, thank you.
But, Madam Chair, just to follow up real quick, and sorry, Craig, he's still in contradiction of our own internal auditor. So I think whether it's been addressed in the town charter, or I mentioned the Ethics Commission earlier, there should be some kind of recourse, whether it's this person or any other town official, especially an elected one, that doesn't comply to a request from the town auditor, internal auditor. What's the recourse? So if,
I think
let's-
I think that's with Mr. Baldwin. I'm not
Right,
sure what
okay.
else we
Thank
can
you.
do.
Right,
I mean,
okay.
You know, to
Right.
me, Jack, I don't think I can answer you, because I think if this question came before me, I would consult with the town attorney,
Right,
which it
okay,
seems like
gotcha.
that's
Okay.
what Ms.
I
Saxon
agree.
has done.
Okay, thank you, you're right, thank you.
So, and I'm not trying to brush it off in any way,
No,
I'm just saying, I
I
don't
agree.
have the answer.
Right.
So that's, I think it's really a question for Mr. Baldwin, and I know he's addressing it. So, Mr. Curley?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And I wholeheartedly agree with the consensus of this group and this board in terms of if there's been an ethical violation, it needs to be addressed. If someone's not responding to an audit finding, that's problematic. I don't think that should be condoned. But if I heard you correctly, Ms. Saxel, you mentioned that you had reached out to this registrar via email and got no response. But I just want a clarification, because on page 69 of the backup, there is a letter addressed to you from, it's on Matt Wagner, Registrar of Voters, stationery, but it's not dated. So I don't know if this is a response to what you had
Yes.
inquired about, or if this is, because it's not dated, it's not clear where what the timeline is here. I just want to make sure that's clear for the record.
Yes, that response was given to me back in April 2022. It's actually,
next page,
the page prior does say was received via email April 13th,
Oh, okay.
2022. And it was received
Yep.
in April from Mr. Wagner in response to my audit report. And then when I followed up with a follow-up email, just to ensure that he had complied or what the status was of the compliance, I did not receive any response. And then followed up with Attorney Baldwin, who is working on, resolving the issue of the corrective letter.
Got it. That's helpful, because I think the order of events and the timeline is important. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. And we can, if the board wants, happy to provide an update if there's any change in the status of this item going forward. But if not, we do have another 7 or 8 audits to get through. Connie, was there anything else on this audit that you wanted to discuss, or do you want to
No, I think
continue on?
I will continue on if, as long as no one has any other questions.
I'm
Okay.
upset when people don't respond to you. That upsets us.
Thank you, I appreciate that. The next is Greenway Property Services. Invoices paid July 2021 through February 2022. An examination of invoices paid by the town to Greenway Property Services for the 8-month period from July 1, 2021 through February 28, 2022 was conducted. The scope of the audit consisted 100% audit sample of invoices submitted and paid to the vendor by the town. 47 invoices were examined, totaling $1,035,951.11. These invoices pertain to outsourced landscaping services. Due to a cost of living adjustment that was unilaterally applied by the vendor and the lack of cross-referencing invoices to bid awards amounts by the department, it was recommended that the Parks Department immediately commence cross-referencing all invoices submitted by the vendor to the bid award pricing sheet in order to ensure accuracy prior to payment. The cost of living adjustment should have been approved by the town purchasing department by written notice to the vendor and department head prior to adjusting invoice pricing by the vendor, but this did not occur. All increases in vendor rates noted must comply with the written terms documented in the bid award, as well as future bid awards, which include advance written notice of an agreed-upon cost of living allowance between the town and vendor. No loss in town funds was noted as a result of this finding, since the vendor applied the correct cost of living adjustment to their invoices. The department head and director of purchasing both agreed and complied. 6 out of 47 invoices totaling $535,825 were paid to the vendor for materials and labor that fell outside the terms of the bid award. It was recommended that future bids include clear, specific language to incorporate a set hourly and machinery rate for occasions where field maintenance or repair services are required from the awarded vendor, and where proper quotes or bidding is not feasible due to sole source time constraints or other emergency circumstances. These awarded rates per the bid should be used for billing on all future jobs that fall into this category. The department head and director of purchasing both agreed and complied. Are there any questions?
Mr. Mottola?
Thank you. Connie, on the finding number 2, the $500,000 outside of the bid
Yes.
award, you state that these were described in munis as emergency purchases or sole source purchases.
Correct.
And then it says it should be noted that these 6 invoices were discussed with the purchasing director, and he found them to be within the guidelines of the town purchasing policy.
Yes.
Does your audit go into whether that statement in fact is correct? Or do you just rely on him telling you that?
At that time, I did rely on his verbal confirmation that these amounts paid were due to a bid waiver and he felt fell within the parameters of the town purchasing policy guidelines.
And do you recall what the emergencies were, or what the sole source
Yes.
purchases were?
They primarily pertained to Gould Manor field renovations, which were over $439,000. And those were pertained to bid waiver. Yes. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah,
to
go ahead.
Mr.
I was gonna ask one as well,
Yeah,
but yeah.
Go ahead, you guys can follow up.
Go ahead,
Ms.
Mr.
Saxel,
Yes.
emergency. I'm going to read our policy related to what constitutes an emergency. It says, where required under unforeseen emergency conditions requiring immediate response by virtue of a legal requirement arising under federal or state law or a local ordinance, the purchasing authority may exempt one-time only purchases from public bidding requirements. How on earth does landscaping fit under that definition of an emergency?
If I may, I did speak to Anthony Calabrese, Director of Recreation, and he can further elaborate on that for you.
Oh, I didn't know you were. He's still here.
Would you like to
Anthony.
come up, Anthony?
Happy to.
You want
Yeah,
to
again,
roll up a chair, please?
I mean, a bid waiver is a pretty,
Or sole source, that's the other issue. It could be either or.
yeah, but again, we do have a policy.
We have a
So
policy on
you
so far.
stated that Gerald Foley signed off on this on the basis that it was an emergency. Now, I just read our policy on what constitutes an emergency. I'm having a hard time with this one. So
So-
can you shed some more light on that, please?
I will do my best. So Anthony Calabrese, Director of Parks and Recreation. I believe that the CAO, Tom Bremer, came before the boards in December of '21, if my memory serves correct, to present the Gould Manor remediation project and additional updates for, I think it was about $1.4 million. Due to time restraints, getting shovels in the ground and trying to get Gould Manor fields ready for the spring baseball season, which was April 1st, This was deemed an emergency, and I believe the email that Mr. Bremer had sent to the boards describing this was, in order to get the project done on time for those baseball fields, we were going to utilize contractors that we already had under bid, which in this case was Greenway Property Services, who is our contractor. In their contract, they did have a section about emergency construction, reconstruction, and that is what we used here, and that was why we went forward with Greenway in this case.
Okay, I just want to be clear. What came before us was a funding request, not a bid waiver.
Excuse me, ma'am. I don't believe bid waivers would come before you. And I could be wrong. Maybe they do, but
You are wrong. You are wrong.
okay.
because
And I guess I could be wrong. I could be wrong.
In the absence of an emergency, a bid waiver does come before this.
In the absence
That's
of an
all.
emergency, so I guess the discussion really would be whether there was an emergency.
Right, and an emergency, again, an unforeseen emergency condition requiring immediate response by virtue of a legal requirement or a local ordinance. I'm just, respectfully, this was neither unforeseen nor
could say
something
unforeseen.
requiring an immediate response
know
by
that.
virtue of a legal requirement under federal or state law. So I guess I'm really struggling with this one because, Ms. Sachs, let me ask you a question. Are employees familiar with the purchasing policy?
Yes.
I mean, in general?
Yes.
Okay. And our purchasing director is the enforcer, if you will, right? He's the one that's supposed to make sure that we follow the policy before we spend the town's money, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Well, I'm just gonna say for the record, I'd like to know what else was in the $535,000 besides School Manor, but, to have over $1 million of expenses, more than half of which are outside the bid, is troubling on its face. And I don't see anything in what was just described that constitutes an emergency under our current policy. So, does anyone else have a question on this? Can't tell Ms. LeClaire?
Yeah, so part of what I wanted to confirm is I always thought that if you use the emergency bid waiver, that they were supposed to come before our board at our next meeting. And like an example would be when the library flooded and they needed to do immediate repairs, they came back to us and told us that they did that. So it seems to be there's some kind of misunderstanding.
Well, just to respond to that, so there's two issues. One is where we have an emergency, which is a pretty high threshold to meet, I believe. There is another section of the policy which states, in any case in which compliance with the purchasing requirements shall deem to be impractical or not in the best interests of the town, which is obviously a broader, more judgmental provision, bidding requirements may be waived with the approval of the purchasing authority and concurred upon by a majority of the Board of Finance. So, you're right, but I don't think that's after the fact. So I think if there's an emergency bid waiver, then the board is notified after the fact.
That is true.
If it's a non-emergency, then it requires approval. Again, just reading from the policy. Is that helpful?
And we just had, sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I've been called in, so.
Mr. DeWitt?
This does not seem to be covered under the definition of emergency, and it's a little troubling to me because we did have some Philpott-related things that were classified as emergency. So I'll just leave it at that. Feels like this could have been done under a sole source justification. Guy's there, he's working, he's got a set rate, we don't wanna have to go out to bid, we could do a sole source justification. The other thing I have to say is the CAO did not portray it that way, nothing against your department, because I know you're trying to do the right thing. It was brought before us that we wanted to get the ball field open in the spring, I get it, but the use of emergency funds is out there, and I think it's accurately portrayed in here as an issue, and it should have been in the audit.
Ms. Berman?
Yeah, I just want to add to that, because I remember that meeting, and there was, I'm not gonna say pressure, but the idea of having everything done, including, I believe, the bathrooms and the fencing and the scoreboards, have this beautiful for spring. And it was a funding request because I remember talking about those bathrooms, like I want comparables, I want to understand why this. And in the end, I was somewhat persuaded by the timing. Get this done by spring, let's not delay. But it was never portrayed. I don't recall it as an emergency, as we've got this vendor, we're gonna get them in there and have them complete the work. So I understand, in retrospect, kind of looking at the way that these were paid and saying it can be, honestly, it's like an oversight, like we didn't look at the COLA, we didn't look at the everything else, so then let's put this into the emergency column, but that was not how it was portrayed to us. So I feel like it's convenient, but it doesn't fit. So
Well, the
that's
COLA, just to be clear, the COLA is not part of the emergency, that was
No,
the
no,
first audit finding.
Right. But do you know what I'm saying? It's like putting a square in a circle, it doesn't fit.
Yeah, we did not vote on a bid waiver, very clearly. Mr. DeWitt, you raised a point about sole source, but I do want to go back to something Ms. Saxel said. So Ms. Saxel, to Mr. DeWitt's point, maybe we would have a sole source justification had that been identified. If the bid had included, a rate sheet or something for work outside the scope of the bid.
Right. And that was.
But in reading your audit, it doesn't sound like that was present in the bid.
Correct, that was not present.
So on what basis
So my recommendation, this could have all.
What's the basis for what this vendor was charging us, I guess?
Well,
I also have a follow-up on the COLA, but can you just explain that? Like, did you look to see if the vendor was charging us reasonable rates that were comparable to what was in the bid?
I do have copies of the invoices and I did look at them, but in terms of whether the price is reasonable or not, I cannot attest to that. However, the point of my recommendation was this could have all been eliminated or avoided if we had clear language in the bid award that stated if we have any jobs that need to be done outside of this bid award, if we find that we have some major repair and maintenance related to landscaping services that needs to be done, this is the set rate we will charge, this is the amount we will charge for labor and machinery and equipment, and we could have avoided, all of this.
Well, right, because that would have been part of the basis on which to award the bid to this vendor, right?
Yeah.
If they had the rate sheet in
Right.
there that
If
said,
they had-
okay, if there's anything else we're gonna do for you, we'll charge you X per hour.
Right.
And if that amount was more or less or comparable to another vendor, that may have been part of the selection, of this vendor. But I guess what makes me uncomfortable is, and you see this all the time, you'll get a bid for a certain amount, but then things outside the scope are very often charged at a different rate. I'm not saying that happened with these landscaping services, but with professional services, that happens all the time. And things outside the scope of a bid or a contract are very often charged at different, higher value-added rates. So, so that's a follow-up question that I have. And I guess my other question, and I'm sorry to monopolize this, but this one was troubling to me. Two things. One is I understand that we were able to justify the COLA after the fact. But when somebody was signing off on and paying these invoices, and they're going through finance, on what basis are these getting approved if they've got prices in them that don't agree to the bid document? I mean, am I understanding this correctly in that we figured out after the fact that because wouldn't that be documented, for example, on an invoice? So if I have an invoice and I'm signing off on it, I'm going to say, okay, it's X amount per hour. That's more than the bid. It's more than the bid because we've got a 5% escalation for a COLA.
Right.
And that's reasonable. It seems like here we did that after the fact. So what that concerns me about that is basically the review process that's happening when we sign off on invoices. Can you help me with that one?
So typically, prior to an invoice being paid, there's a process. It becomes a purchase requisition. The requisition is reviewed by the department head, it becomes a purchase order. The purchase order is reviewed by the director of purchasing, and the invoice can then be paid against that purchase order. At the time when I was reviewing the invoices and I went down to purchasing and I asked him why they did not agree to the bid award sheet, he was not certain. And then I went back to Recreation Department and spoke to the staff there who reviews and approves the invoices, and was told that a cost of living adjustment had been applied to the invoice. The invoice did agree to the bid award sheet, but a cost of living adjustment had been applied. However, the cost of living adjustment was applied by the vendor without notice to the purchasing authority. So then I notified.
And I
Right.
I don't mean to pick on Anthony's contractor vendor here. I'd be surprised if this wasn't happening elsewhere. I mean, if we were to look at other, bid awards, if we don't have a good process in place to make sure that invoice pricing agrees to bid awards, I'd be skeptical that this is an isolated instance with just one vendor. So, I mean, to me, this points to, and I think your audit covers it, but it really points to, the need to clarify what, when someone's approving and signing off on something, what are they supposed to do before they approve and sign off on something? Are people understanding that they should be, comparing prices to bids, et cetera? Anthony, sorry, I see.
No, yeah, I didn't want to interrupt you again. Sorry. So what my account clerk here did was look at the bid, saw that the COLA should have been there, and that's what the bill said. The step that was missed here was the purchasing department didn't apply the COLA per contract. So from the approval standpoint, it would get through all those steps until, I guess, the purchasing department. At that point, yes, I agree with you. At that point, maybe the COLA should have been realized, that it was added, because they weren't aware that it was added. Because again, they might not be as familiar as my staff is with the contract.
But your staff, so your staff is making a determination what the correct COLA is and when it should be applied?
Yeah,
because to me, that's the role of purchasing. I think that's what purchasing is supposed to be.
Right,
is to be signing off on that, right?
Yeah, right. So what my staff does is they call purchasing and say, hey, what's the COLA for this year? We're applying it to the contract, and that's what happens. Now, there's a few different people in purchasing, and it might not necessarily be the purchasing director that they speak with. So the purchasing director, I believe, is the one who ultimately, after I approve it from my department, gets it in their inbox next, type of thing. So again, like I said, I'm just stating, my staff's not arbitrarily making up a COLA and saying, hey, this year it's going to be 2.3. They contact the purchasing department to get what the correct COLA is for each contract, every contract.
Okay. Yeah, I would just, you know, to me, I would have expected to see that documented somehow on the invoice, but I'll take your word for it for now. I think my concern on this whole issue, and again, I want to give other board members a chance to ask questions, so apologize for monopolizing, but you know, my concern is the, you know, the scope of work outside the bid. We talked about Gould Manor, but Connie, I think you said out of the 535,000, that was 400 and change. What about the rest of the work outside the bid? Was that an emergency also, or how was that justified and approved?
There was
It's all Gould.
irrigation work at Gould Manor as well, but that was $1,800. Athletic field sand and top dress was $87,000. McKinley
That's
Field
separate.
repairs was $7,300, and then the Gould Manor renovations was $439,300.
Approved under one emergency? for that
No,
big
no, these
number?
are various, different invoices.
Not all emergency?
No, no. For example, the irrigation Gould Manor is $1,800, so per town purchasing policy, prudent judgment would be used
Mhm.
in selecting the vendor. You know, that sort of thing. McKinley Field repair, $7,300, that would be quotes. 3 quotes would be required for that.
So that's good. That's good that the whole thing.
And what was the largest one? I didn't know.
And
if
then
I
there was another one,
misunderstood.
athletic field sand and top dress,
And
87,
how much was
that was
that one?
87,000. And
87, so that would have been a bidding.
that would have
that would
been
have
required
bid.
by town purchasing policy to be bid. However, did speak to, I'm sorry?
I think that is in the bid.
I did speak to Gerald Foley about that, and he felt it still fell under the parameters of the bid award, but I searched and searched and searched and still could not find the rates or anything that the vendor had charged on those invoices to justify that invoice.
So he couldn't point to it where it was in the bid for you?
No,
And we didn't get through this.
no, but if he felt it still fell under the realm of the bid award.
Top dressing and overseeding is something that we do on every one of our fields, so that's not outside of the scope of their work. And again, I'm not 100%, I can't speak to that amount of money. That doesn't sound like one location, that sounds
No,
like,
it's various fields.
a dozen locations.
Various fields around town. And they are awarded clay, servicing clay fields, athletic fields, which I believe these are. But the rates, I just couldn't cross-reference the rates to the bid award sheet.
That is a slippery slope. That really is.
Ms. Leclerc?
So I have a question. When we have a bid award to like a contractor, like a landscaper, does that award get written up, and then do we still do purchase orders that would then get attached to each invoice?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
There would be a purchase order, and invoices would be applied to that.
Okay, but so do we have like a rate sheet that then should get attached to like every
Well-
invoice to match it
Well,
up?
there is a rate
Good luck.
sheet.
Yeah.
Good luck with that.
It's very cumbersome.
Okay.
This is very small, but there's a lot of
Hundreds and hundreds of rates.
rates on this sheet.
Just for that one
And-
specific vendor?
I know you can't
or-
see it, Lori, but it's attached. It's the last page on that
Okay.
audit report, and it's very cumbersome.
So, it's just so I could maybe shed some light and hopefully ease some of the concern with this. When we took over the Parks Department in July of '21, this is what we inherited, essentially, was this type of contract. And as I started getting stacks of bills to say, hey, here's August, or August is not even a good month, but here's September, and there's 40 bills in there for 40 different locations, and we mowed each one of these 4 times, and we groomed this one 16 times, and we lined here 12 times. I've got staff now that have to chase down, basically following the crew to make sure that that work is getting done, which takes up a lot of their time. we also rely on, the coaches in the youth leagues and things of that, and groups of that nature that are going to call in and say, hey, we just played last night and the field wasn't lined. Well, now I've got to have my staff jot down a note and be like, and follow up with Greenway to say, hey, why didn't you line that field? We got a call, we know it wasn't lined. And then we're disputing, we spend weeks disputing charges that may or may not should have happened. So I feel like we have a much better handle on it. I don't know how this was done in the past. I could be completely.
Well, that's a kind of a good segue, because this issue definitely preceded you, because, and Connie, I don't know if this is why you looked at this, but this was actually one of the issues raised in the DPW audit report.
Yes.
And I want to go back to that, because as I was looking at the status, and Anthony, maybe you have a view on this, but I remember talking to Mr. Centifanti about this at the time. So I've got the audit report here. If anyone's interested in looking at it, it's on page 8. But it says the town outsourced park maintenance approximately 4 years ago. Again, this report was written 3 years ago. This reduced the number of employees in this division. It was noted by the Parks Division that there was a concern regarding the cost of the outsourcing of park maintenance. The costs paid by the town included additional amounts paid to the vendor in excess of the bid award. So this has been happening. And it goes on then to list the amounts that were paid on an annual basis. And the recommendation was as follows. We recommend the town perform an analysis of the outsourced park maintenance contract and related costs, including the amounts paid to the vendor for service provided in excess of the bid award. So, and I remember this recommendation specifically because when I read it, I asked Mr. Centifanti what he was trying to say. I said, is this trying to say that we are not in compliance with bids? And I think his answer was possibly, but the real gist of it was you should perform an analysis to see if it's really economically prudent for you to be outsourcing these costs, because maybe an analysis was done at some point in time, but every year you're paying for services that, well exceed the amount in the bid, and so you should analyze this to determine whether the outsourcing arrangement makes sense. So that was the gist of his comment, rightly or wrongly. And I guess, Connie, you do have this one marked as being fully implemented. So, Anthony, just to piggyback off the comments you made and all the follow-up that's required from, your employees, has there been an analysis done to determine whether it makes sense? I mean, if we spent just $1 million last year, I mean, does it make, is that something that you're looking at annually?
So,
and I guess, Connie, was this analysis that was recommended ever done?
Yes, it was. I had performed an analysis, I want to say back in 2021, regarding outsourced services, and compared it to the cost of in-house labor to see which was more prudent. Was it better to hire more employees, or was it cheaper to outsource? And I can supply you with a copy of that audit.
Yeah, and I'm glad to hear we did that. I guess the question is, though, I don't know if we were spending $1 million a year when you did your analysis, or if $1 million is even indicative of an ongoing cost. But I guess,
I bet we were.
It seems
I believe it was over $1 million at that time. But yes,
what's that?
I said I believe it was over $1 million for the outsourced property
So
services.
with the $1 million, it still made sense to do, from a financial perspective, to have this outsourced?
Yes, primarily a lot of it involves mowing, and there's so many fields that have to be mowed so many times per week, and other town properties and areas throughout town, and other services, fall cleanup and such. So they do quite a bit.
All right, well, and part of the reason I brought that up was just to say that, Anthony, this appears to be an issue that's been around. This audit is 3 years old now, and it was noted as an issue even back then. So you know, so clearly I don't know how often we bid this workout, but it sounds like the bid needs some work.
If I could just chime in on a lot of what you just said. So I haven't seen the audit that Connie did with the analysis. I'd love to see that, because prior to hearing that there was one done, I would have said no, but it would be something that I would want to see done, because I have a feeling, my opinion, based on my experience, would be I think we would save money if we brought majority of it back in-house. I think I think there's a nice way to hybrid it. I think if we had our Parks Department maintaining the ball fields and we outsourced some of the mowing, mowing, it takes a skill, but a much lesser skill than it does to groom a ball field. It might even be multiple companies that we can chop that bid up to that could then hold the other ones accountable. I know the Board of Ed is looking at that. Right now, Greenway has the Board of Ed contract and our contract. So their contract combined is well over $1 million, probably $1.5 million, if not more. And you mentioned how there was work being done outside of the contract in that last audit. That was a completely separate company. That wasn't even Greenway. So it's not like we're having the same issue with the same company. This is now the second company that's come in, and we've had all these extra charges that we're hitting that we're not capturing within the written contract. So I do think that there's ways that we could probably bring it back in, but I would love to do a cost analysis to see, now that we've had this for almost 7 years, we've had it outsourced. The Parks Department was decimated. It used to be, at their peak, they had 21 guys in that department. All the machines, they went down to 4. We're up to 7 right now. We're able to start getting some of that machinery back, and we've taken back some of the mowings and the maintenance, but not to the point where I'm comfortable to say, hey, we can do it all. We can't do it with 7 guys. That's not a possibility. And to the question about how often this gets bid, we've bid this probably 3 times in the last 4 years. We have not been, and each time we've bid it, we've changed the way it's been bid because it's so convoluted. But now that, again, now that it's within my department and I have a much better understanding of how it operates and how the process goes, I think I have a better idea of how this bid should be set up. And I think Angelos Papageorge from the Board of Ed feels the same way. So I think we'll be able to fix this in the future, the near future.
Okay. Yeah, and well, maybe Connie, you can circle back to us and work with Anthony and Angelos and whoever to maybe refresh that analysis. That would be helpful. And I just I know we have to move on to the other audit reports, but just for the benefit of the board, I did ask Mr. Schmidt to provide the board with a listing of all the bid waivers that had been issued in the last year to understand what we're doing. And the main reason, or the original reason I asked for that, was I felt that it would be informative to our purchasing policy, because if we are routinely waiving bids for various reasons, then that probably means those buckets of items need to be treated separately from a policy perspective. But Mr. Schmidt committed to providing that, and I think it's something that the board should look at and be aware of. And I do want to make sure that we are complying with until we get that new policy, I think we do need to double down and make sure that we're actually complying with the current policy we do have. So I'll leave it at that. Does anyone else have questions on this audit?
Finish it up. We're on number 3, are we not?
We're on
Right.
number
This-
9.
We're almost a third of the way.
This one's a quick
6 more to
one.
go, Chris.
This one's a quick one. Burr Mansion, audit of event deposits and expenses for account transfer to the town. A review was conducted of Burr Mansion customer event deposits, i.e. deposits paid by customers in advance of events, as recorded on their books by the Fairfield Museum as of May 1, 2022, along with an examination of all the invoices paid by the museum from January 1 through May 1, 2022. The purpose of this examination was to verify the net amount due to the town of Fairfield in association with the transfer of the Burr Homestead Event Management commencing May 1st. Audit examinations determined that the Fairfield Museum owed the town $74,865 as a result of this transfer. I contacted Mike Geely, director of the Fairfield Museum, and he promptly paid the town the total amount due on May 31, 2022. There was no official audit report
there wasn't,
written
okay.
for that
Oh,
one. It
no,
was
no,
just
no,
a
just say,
strictly,
okay.
All right,
Thank you.
it was a quick
thanks.
examination, and an email was sent to all parties stating the results, and Mr. Geely paid us the.
So we sent
the-
3 big guys over there, he paid our 74,000, and
He
we're all,
certainly
and we're all
did.
clear?
Yeah, that
Okay.
is correct. Are there any questions? Okay, well, the next one was WPCF, septage waste collection and disposal. Customer invoices and associated septage receipts were examined to ensure proper billing, receipt, and recording of customer payments. It was recommended that the WPCF administrative assistant immediately be granted Munis access to view the department's revenue accounts so she may verify each month that the total dollar amount of customer receipts in the form of checks sent to the sewer department for deposit were properly recorded in Munis. The department agreed and complied. It was also noted that the septage fee charged to haulers for dumping septage waste has not been updated since 2011. The fee has remained static at 8 cents per gallon over the last 11 years. A review of septage fees charged by 13 other municipalities was conducted. It revealed that Fairfield fell within the median when compared to other towns. The WPCF should reevaluate and consider increasing the current septic fee charged per gallon for the disposal of septage waste in order to ensure that it sufficiently covers processing and administrative expenses associated with it. The department had agreed and is reviewing whether the fee should be increased. Are there any questions? Yes.
WPCF is the facility, right?
Yes.
But the people we're auditing are the WPCA, is that correct?
Yes, I think the term is interchangeable, isn't it? Water Pollution Control Facility, Water Pollution Control Administration.
I thought it was authority. but-
Or authority.
When I think the WPCA, I think of a body of people that are making decisions for.
Yes.
So I guess I'm kind of wondering, when that body of people who is specifically supposed to be focusing on the WPCF
Mhm.
and the fact that, come up with the rate, how did we not know? How did they not know for 20, no, sorry.
11. I
11
believe it was
years?
11
That we
years.
haven't changed the rate? I mean, that seems like a pretty simple thing. I mean, we talk about, it's a self-sustaining fund, so how would we even know
Right.
that? Unless you did this, we wouldn't know that.
Yeah, that's how we know, right?
Right. That is correct.
So what
Um,
responsibility does the WPCA have to,
Well, yeah.
I mean, this is basically under the category of rate generation. That's the way I'm looking at it, right?
Right. And usually when I
Yeah.
perform my audits.
Can I just ask, I'm sorry, Mr. DeWitt, I had the same question, but Connie, how much revenue is this?
Well, the revenue, well, this is what prompted the audit. In fiscal year '20, the revenue was almost $39,000. In fiscal year '21, it went to $12,000. In fiscal year '22, it went down to $2,800. So I inquired with, and which, that's what prompted my audit. I wanted to see, is there a problem? What's going on? I spoke to the director of the WPCF, or WPCA as you will, John Bodie, and he was uncertain as to the decline in the revenue and why these septic
They're not charging
haulers are
enough.
not coming
Yeah.
and dumping.
We gotta put you on WPCA.
So he was uncertain as to the decline in the revenue. But he told me that he is planning on sending out a mailing to septic haulers notifying them that the plant does accept such waste. And the mailing will include their address and the fee associated with it, just to promote business awareness.
So we're not updating the rate? This 8 cents a gallon is not being?
Per my last follow-up email with the department head, he said they're considering it, they're reviewing it, the possibility of increasing it. but it has not happened.
You know, can I interject, Madam Chair? Just, I mean, honestly, if you look at the septic fees, Fairfield is not, it's in line. I mean,
It's in the middle.
almost every town
Yes, it
charges
does.
about the same amount, really.
It's in the median range.
It's in the,
So
it's in the
nothing's
median,
changed
yes.
for 11 years across the whole state of Connecticut.
I mean, if you look at the other towns, it's
It's right there.
comparable, yeah.
Yeah,
I think the revenue is so minimal
Yeah,
that it's,
The
Right.
revenue is
Yes,
minimal,
wasn't
right.
consistent.
how much
It's not
is it gonna
meant to be
change
revenue
anything?
generating.
It's so minuscule
Right,
in the grand scheme.
right.
I mean, Connie, I think, and Jack, you're right, I mean, it might be a tad low if you just look at Fairfield County exempting Greenwich, but I guess what I'm more concerned about is with a flat rate, we went from, what did you say, 39,000 to
Yes.
2,800 over a course of
3 years.
3 years.
3 years.
how can that happen? That does not make
It's not
sense.
because we're not charging, then if we're charging the same as everyone else, how does it go?
Right.
What-
If you're charging the same and you have the same amount of rate flow, then the numbers shouldn't change.
Was there an
Right.
It's
explanation?
just math.
He says they are not coming. They are not coming, he says.
Really, you know, to not have an answer to that, or for the department not to be able to explain that,
Wow.
is a little concerning. I don't know what the right amount is, but that's, 39,000 is what, 15 times more than we had this past year. It just doesn't, I mean, is the revenue getting booked elsewhere? Are we losing revenue?
We're just
Sounds like we're losing
we're not
revenue.
doing it anymore. And whether that was a conscious decision not to do it, or people aren't coming, it's just not being done
Yeah.
anymore.
From my understanding is they're not coming and dumping
Where are they going?
to other neighboring towns. The answer, the question is, why are they going to neighboring towns? I don't know.
Especially when
I
it's
guess the
about the
question-
same.
Yeah, well, I guess the question is, do we want them to come here and dump?
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, that's
I mean,
the
if the
other
goal
question.
is we don't
Well,
want them to
yeah.
come here and dump anymore, then
We're doing great.
looks like we're doing great. Exactly right.
Yeah.
Maybe we don't want, I mean,
Well, you still have to process the waste and all that.
Yeah.
And that's why you charge a fee for that.
right.
But you still have to pay
Yeah, just-
administrative costs to bill and
We're all
collect
expecting
and
it.
deposit.
No,
Right,
wait.
right.
Can we move on?
Yeah,
Madam Chair?
yeah.
Something-
Yeah, exactly.
Something not
Okay,
garbage
so-
related?
It's a
From
bit
$2,000,
illogical,
yeah.
But,
If there's been no change in rates, and if the other towns, particularly in Fairfield County, most of them are a little higher,
Well, I mean, a penny.
this doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah. And you know what, this isn't about the money for me. This is about a process.
Right.
This is about a
Yeah,
group of
not
people
changing it for
that
11
talk about
years.
people are put in a position, WPCA, and they don't know the rates change for 11 years. It just makes me think there's other things they're missing, but, because I'm with you
Well,
for
yeah, and also
$2,000,
both.
okay,
Yeah.
we're wasting our time, but.
right.
Madam Chair, can
I mean, yeah, please.
I'm sorry, I'm a little off topic, so I don't want to interrupt you. You're still hung up on this, huh? You're okay if I
She's
move
saying
on,
go ahead,
or?
yeah.
I just
Oh,
have
no, no,
one
yeah,
more
no,
remark.
Yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
Well, just for the record, I noticed that Ms. Saxel has a closing remark, and I've noticed it on a few of these reports. And since this was kind of been a theme from earlier in our meeting, as odd as this is, she took a moment, Connie did, to thank the Water Pollution Control Facility. Greatly appreciated working with all involved parties, and I saw a similar statements. And obviously she encountered not exactly that level of cooperation. So just for the record, I think it's great that there are obviously that particular process, the wait list reconciliation process, which I think is the next audit, and perhaps there were a few others kind of seemed like they worked exceptionally well with you.
Oh,
to-
yes,
to-
yes.
to give it
Everyone, for the most
Yes.
part.
Yeah, exactly, John.
Yes.
Right.
As I have probably said before, most departments are very amenable to the audit recommendations. They adhere to them as soon as I show them what the issue is. Sometimes they immediately take action, even before I walk out the door. But I still put it in the report because it's important to report on it. But they usually are always very accepting of the audits and the audit findings and recommendations.
That's a good thing, No, absolutely.
So, yeah, the departments have been great to
So-
work with. Marina boat wait list. Oh, if there's no more questions, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump ahead.
Go for it.
Yeah,
Marina,
no, I would just ask that maybe there's a follow-up, and maybe we can ask when they're with us, but I just, my concern here is that somehow we're not billing all the revenue we're supposed to. Because there's nothing
where I'm at.
logical about a decline of that size and the idea that callers are going elsewhere when fees in neighboring towns are
Are similar,
higher. And
or
for
higher.
some reason they're not coming. So maybe we could just get a follow-up on
Sure.
that and then move on.
Okay, Marina boat wait list, 2021. An examination of the boat wait list and persons assigned marina boat slips as recorded in their Mariner Search database was conducted to ensure that all persons properly paid the required fee and that all persons assigned boat slips were properly taken off the wait list. It was recommended that the boat wait list application be updated to include a space on the bottom of the document entitled "For Office Use Only." The marina manager should record the type of documentation reviewed when verifying the applicant's required Fairfield residency, such as voter registration, etc., prior to placing the person on the wait list. In addition, the rec track receipt number and date paid should be recorded here as well. If a secondary name is used by the applicant, this should be documented for employee ease of reference. The department had agreed and complied. It was recommended that the marina manager perform an annual cross-reference from the patron waitlist applications maintained in the file to the actual waitlist derived from the Mariner Search database to verify accuracy. All discrepancies discovered at that time should be researched and corrected. This can be done during the slow season. The department had agreed and complied. I worked with the marina manager and assisted him in reconciling the wait lists and corrected any discrepancies noted. Do you have any questions?
I'm just gonna point it
Yeah.
out again, the
Oh,
assistance and cooperation received was greatly appreciated. That's also a very gracious statement on your
Oh,
part
thank
as
you.
well, so.
Yes. Okay. Town-owned electric vehicle charging stations. A review of electric vehicle charging stations owned by the town and Board of Education was conducted at the request of the Chief Fiscal Officer. The town provides 5 electric vehicle charging station locations, which are available for use to the public at no charge, except for the Mill Plain Road parking lot, where the customer must pay $6 for day parking. The charging stations are located at 75 Mill Plain Road Rec Center, 140 Mill Plain Road Metro Center across from the cemetery, 65 Reef Road, which is the Sherman Green lot behind the gazebo, 210 Old Dam Road across from the tennis bubble, 1147 Fairfield Woods Road, Fairfield Woods Library. There's also an electrical outlet for vehicle charging located at 100 Mona Terrace, which is the senior center, which can be used by the customer if the patron has their own charging cable. There's also an electrical outlet for vehicle charging at the rear of Sullivan Independence Hall, but it's for town use only. Currently, the town does not possess any electric vehicles. The Board of Ed provides 3 electric vehicle charging stations. They're located at Fairfield Ludlow High School, Fairfield Ward High School, and Riverfield Elementary School. The cost is free to students at the high schools and free to staff at Riverfield Elementary. Electricity cost to the town for the Sherman Green charging station was $4,482 in FY '22. The town has 2 options: to purchase replacement electric vehicle charging stations with ones that have the capability to charge customers a user fee, or keep the current electric vehicle charging stations as they are with no fee charged to the public. The cost for new electric vehicle charging stations with the capability to accept customer payments is $86,600 for single charging station replacements and $110,600 for dual charging station replacements. This is from a quote obtained from a company called Juice Bar in September 2022. If the installation of the new charging stations is selected, it's recommended that the town research possible outsourcing opportunities with private vendors who will handle all aspects of the administration, billing and maintenance of EV charging stations while requiring the vendor to pay a portion of the revenue generated back to the town. If the town handles the administration and billing and maintenance for the new stations, it's recommended that the town monitor the total cost of and usage for each charging station to determine the profit or loss and adjust user rates accordingly in order to reap a profit or at a minimum break even. It's also recommended that the town add the retractable cord feature to the new charging stations and to avoid trip and fall hazards and other potential liability. And if the town keeps the EV charging stations that are in place, then it's recommended that the town install visible signage to inform the public that the charging stations are complimentary from the town of Fairfield, and also place a customer courtesy time limit on the signage so all may have an opportunity to use the stations. It's also recommended that separate electric meters be installed at 75 Mill Plain Road, also at the Fairfield Woods Library, and 100 Mona Terrace Senior Center plug, which currently do not have meters dedicated to them, rather than including this usage in the overall usage of electricity for the entire location. But of course, there would be an additional cost required for this. Are there any questions? Beautiful.
Yeah, what are we doing with this? I guess, Jared, what path are we taking? Status quo?
So we're, as you can tell from reading the audit, when this was done, although well-intentioned, was done, probably somewhat haphazardly, and so we are going to develop a policy. As you can imagine, this is a, this kind of touches on there are a lot of different aspects to this. It's not just a matter of do we charge, do we not? Well, if we charge, all right, we got to go in and we have to change out all of these to accommodate the charging. And then so what happens when you have somebody charging a vehicle and somebody else pulls the thing out and starts charging there? So we need something to deal with that. We've got the issue of, we are, as you know, and have started the infrastructure for this, for doing this for town vehicles at Town Hall. So there's going to be that aspect as well. So we realize that this is out there and that there are some serious issues, and we're in the process of developing a policy to address this. And like I said, it will likely require some additional expenses related to changing out the current units that are in there to, I would imagine, to require payment for usage. But there are definitely other aspects to this that we need to consider when we're putting that policy in. And also understand that right now the electric vehicles are a minority still, although growing. We want to be able to plan for what's it going to look like? What's the town going to look like 10 years from now, 15 years from now? How many electric vehicles are there going to be? And so, we want to be able to take into consideration those kinds of things that are out of our control as well. So it's not a simple thing that we can just, you gotta pay now. It's a lot more complicated.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I gathered that it's expensive to put in different, it seems like it's a pretty high hurdle. I don't know how much, I guess we don't know how much the electricity is costing us that the public's using, because we don't have separate meters on some of these things.
Right.
And some are solar powered.
Right, but if we judge by Sherman Green, which is a commuter parking lot, which is highly used, and that was only about $5,000 a year, but you multiply that.
The electrical bill?
Correct,
Oh, wow.
for that charging station, but then you multiply that by the number of charging stations that you have, and, and if you want to increase the number of charging stations, obviously, your cost increases, and then you have to determine how much do you want to charge the customer as a user fee.
Yeah, they're,
So just the ones that we're putting in town hall, are those gonna be open for the public, or is there gonna be some restriction on those?
No, the plan right now is that those will be for town vehicles.
Yes, town use only.
Right, but I mean, how do we control that?
lock them.
It's my
Somebody drives up on the weekend and plugs their car in, do we have a?
Right,
is there
it's
a-
my understanding you're gonna, employees will have a special ID or a special card to use the station.
And we're getting the deluxe ones
That's
there
right.
that
Yes.
don't
Yeah.
allow
Right,
anybody.
it will
to
have a
just-
special
brand new
ID
phone.
to use the card, to use the charging station.
Mr. Curley, you had a question?
I was just gonna comment that I'm glad that I'm glad to hear that the administration is looking to develop a policy. I think the adoption of electric vehicles is gonna continue to grow, as you pointed out, Jared. So I think it's important that this is not kind of haphazard, as you pointed out. But I do think that a lot of the cost associated with these chargers, can be mitigated with grants and with other credits. With the infrastructure bill that was passed federally, with the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed federally, there are a lot of incentives for companies to work with municipalities to put these in place. I also think that what you described, Connie, is not mutually exclusive. We don't necessarily have to either keep what we have and add signage or replace with a cost. We can do both, right?
That is correct.
If we're looking to expand, we can leave look, there are level 1 chargers, level 2 chargers, level 3 chargers that all charge at different speeds. And if what we have in place is a level 1 charger and it charges 30 miles an hour effectively, that can continue to be free, and there's no cost to leave it in place. The town can work with a company to install a level 2 charger, and then for that faster charging speed, can justify an expense associated with that. So, point is, we don't have to figure this out here.
Right.
But I'm glad to see that we looked into this. I'm glad to see, Jared, that you asked for this review. This kind of hits a little close to home for me for a number of different reasons, but I'm happy to raise my hand and assist the administration as you develop this plan a little bit further.
We appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Curley. Any other questions on this one, or Mr. DeWitt?
Maybe this is an audit committee question, but given the fact that through the whole of 2022, Ms. Saxel did 9 audits. Her time is very valuable. I'd like to see a lot more audits. Is this an auditable thing? This doesn't feel like an audit to me. This feels like a business case analysis, right? So it's not like it's not like we're saying, hey, we wrote a policy and we're complying with it or not. So I guess for the audit committee, is this what we want Connie to be doing? Is business case analysis? Is this a real audit? I guess is my question. Not being an
Well,
audit.
it's not an audit of evaluating internal controls, but it is information that the town needed and required, and they needed someone to go out and investigate and get data and detail and see how much it was going to cost. And I also did a cost analysis to determine, if we went this route and purchased these, how much would we have to charge people? When will the break even be, and that sort of thing. But yeah, auditing encompasses a lot of different areas, and I wear many, many different hats. As you know.
I know you do, but I'd like to see you focus on the.
Right. Even though it did not involve revenue or
Yeah, I
expense.
can respond as a
Right.
member of the audit committee to Mr. DeWitt. I think that, I would put this more in the category of maybe an operational audit. I think this is an appropriate project for Ms. Saxel to do.
Okay.
What I think is far less appropriate is that she's spending her time on accounting tasks, and that's long been a criticism that I've had. I think she should be doing audits full-time. And I think the value would be much greater to the town if she did that versus working on bank reconciliations. So I've said that before on the record, and I'll say it again. But in terms of this particular analysis, I think this is a good thing to do. I think whereas external audits would probably focus more specifically on internal control issues, et cetera.
Yeah.
Internal audits like this, looking at, opportunities for operational efficiencies, if you will, or cost savings, I think are appropriate.
Okay. I think Mary has
Question, there's a
comment.
question.
No,
Okay.
I just wanted to follow up on what Lori said, I agree. I think this was a good use of Connie's time, because this question comes up constantly when we do building projects, if we should put in more of these, and the more we know about them and how they operate and how they work, the better we can answer those questions when an opportunity comes up. So I think this.
Great. The audit committee has spoken. Thank you, I appreciate that.
Okay, any other further questions?
Well, here's a real audit. Surprise cash, never a
Oh,
good
wait,
topic.
You missed one. You missed one. The vehicle inventory. Town of Fairfield.
Oh, sorry, you're right. I
Department
apologize.
vehicle inventory. I know you're anxious for the next one. Including usage and condition assessment. A town vehicle inventory was conducted at the request of the chief administrative officer. The inventory analyses included driver's name, department, vehicle year, make and model, plate number, condition of vehicle, vehicle usage, and odometer reading. On October 12, 2022, the town owned 188 vehicles, which were categorized as passenger vehicles, SUVs, pickup trucks, and vans. These vehicles are used by town departments, DPW operations and administration, park operations, WPCF, and police and fire. It was determined that 163 vehicles are used by employees on a frequent to moderate basis and basis of 2 or more times per week. 60 vehicles are rated as being in poor condition and 3 are deemed junk. All junk vehicles will be sold at public auction.
Nice.
Any question? Okay,
High use is more than twice a week.
yes. Frequent to
Frequent
moderate.
use, okay.
Of 2 or more times per week. Just trying to get a feel for how often our employees using the
No,
cars.
that's, talk about when Mary's comment about data we ask about all the time.
Right,
I was gonna
right.
say,
This is
this is
certainly-
very helpful.
This
like,
is certainly something we ask
when
about all the time.
Oh,
town
great.
cars are
Appreciate that.
Great,
odometer
and
mileage,
we do
so-
have a great auction company that we use, and we get 100% of the auction sale price. There is a premium of 12.5%, but that's paid by the buyer at the time of
wow.
auction. So the town gets 100%, and we get to remove our fleet of some of these junk vehicles.
Get rid of our junk.
And we get some money back in return, so that's a win-win
Great.
situation. The next,
Before we
yes,
move on,
of course.
not specific to this, but it's sort of come up in the last few minutes or so. So it's clear in my head, when you get a request, you, Connie, our internal auditor, it could come from our chief fiscal officer, from Jared.
Yes.
Could come from the first select woman.
Yes.
And in addition to that, there are times where, because you're an employee of the town, right, for the town, you
Yes.
might have other requests made of your fiscal skills.
Yes.
Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And I don't personally, I don't think that's unreasonable. Would I like to see more audits? Yes. However, having said that, in the additional time you have, if there's something that perhaps Jared may ask of you, I don't think it's unreasonable to ask that. I mean, all these have been
Right.
fantastic.
Yeah.
All your reports have been great.
Oh, thank you, I
So, thank you.
appreciate it.
Just follow up on what Jack said, but you yourself will decide at times, I'm gonna go.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's true.
exactly.
There's
Thank you, John.
various
Right, yeah.
ways of how an audit is selected. As you said, could be a request by the controller, the first select woman, the chief fiscal officer, the chief administrative officer, the department head, sometimes fellow employees.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll go into a department and I'll see it myself and I say, what is going on? And that needs to be addressed,
The audit committee.
Right, the audit committee, could come from any source, and as long as it's a valid request, I definitely, go and take a look at it and perform an audit.
And since this is Mr. DeWitt's favorite subject on the next surprise.
Yes.
Oh, no,
Uh,
it's
cash
he was-
count.
not my favorite subject, I would.
He was waiting for this one.
How did this audit come about in particular?
This one arose as a result of our independent DPW audit.
Yeah.
It was one of the audit findings that the independent auditor had recommended that the secondary checkpoint maintain the receipts, cash register receipts of the customers as before they enter the transfer station.
And that's what led you to this particular audit, is that right?
Yes, that is
Okay,
correct.
Thank you.
So it happened to be a beautiful day. It was at the
So-
close of the business day, and I
Great.
did not want to interrupt the business operations. I said, you know what, they're closing in 15 minutes. Let me go down there right now and see how they're closing out the
very kind.
register,
That's awesome.
how their operations are running. So a surprise cash count was conducted in order to physically examine the internal control procedures used in collecting, closing out, balancing, and depositing daily collections at the town transfer station. The aim was to identify any weaknesses that could make town assets, i.e. revenue collections, vulnerable, and to identify areas where internal controls may be strengthened. Solid waste and recycling revenue for fiscal year 2022 was a little over $3.1 million. It was recommended that the door to the scale house where the cash register is located be locked at all times during business hours for security reasons.
Definitely good start.
The cashier should have a key to the door of the facility during the business day for re-entry if he or she needs to leave for any reason. The department head agreed and complied. The guardhouse attendant at the secondary checkpoint, whose associated part-time payroll expense totaled $64,300 in fiscal year '22, and whose primary responsibility was to collect customer receipts in order to verify payment prior to entry into the facility, has been eliminated. These part-time employees now perform other functions at the transfer station. It is recommended that management either reestablish the secondary checkpoint to cover all business hours of operations or implement other internal control measures to ensure that revenue collections are properly collected and safeguarded. The Chief Fiscal Officer and I met with the Interim Director of DPW, the Assistant Director of DPW, and the Scale House Supervisor on October 5th, 2022, to discuss the audit and the importance of safeguarding revenue streams. It was also recommended that the cash register, which is approximately 15 years old, be replaced before it becomes inoperable. The department is in the process of complying. Do you have any questions?
So
So what happened?
you did a surprise cash count,
Yes.
and the result was to get rid of the, and I was there last weekend, and there is only one point, so that's really good, right?
Right, so basically, currently, the current operation is just a scale house cashier who
Yeah.
accepts customer receipts, and then the customer is allowed to go dump. The whole transfer station's been reconfigured.
Yeah, it's
And
much more
then
efficient.
they
yeah.
find it to be much more efficient and better for safety purposes. However, the purpose of the secondary checkpoint, which is now no longer there,
Yeah,
his or her function was to collect the receipt, check what the person had paid for, do a cursory review of what they were dumping, and allow them access to dump, and now that has been eliminated.
And watch where they dump as well.
Right, and
Make
then
sure
there,
they go
there's
to the
several
place.
functions, and I outlined it in the report, what they do. They direct, where to go to dump, what to do, that sort of
Yeah.
thing.
The watch where they dump has been, I would say, has been improved as a result of the changes that they made, because
Better
now,
efficient.
rather than have that person down at the bottom of the hill, they don't have
Yeah,
line
he's up
of
the
sight.
top now,
Right.
yeah.
That person's up at the
Right.
top now, and they can see,
Right.
whether it's going to recycling or,
Right.
Yeah, I would agree with you too, I went there to just dump cardboard, and when I drove by the part where they're dumping the garbage, the guy's like, you have to go down there, right? But you
Right.
gotta
Yeah,
go
he's
around,
directing people,
so,
yeah.
no, I would agree with that. I guess when you said you did a surprise cash count, I expected to hear something about how we're
Well,
making, because that's a
surprise-
cash business
Right,
down there,
surprise
right?
means unannounced. They didn't expect me to come, whereas in
Ah.
my other audits, I'd give them advance notice, I'll be coming, on such and such a date at this time, and I'll be reviewing, whatever I'm reviewing, and they have advance notice, whereas this is no advance notice. So they were indeed surprised to see me,
Yeah.
to say the least.
So they reconcile at the end of the day?
Yes,
the
they were
the
properly
invoices or
closed out the
receipts to
register, the cash agreed to the register tape, the supervisor signed off, yes.
Okay, so I'm sorry, Mr. Curley.
Those controls were fine, I just wanted.
Yeah, I want to give Mr. Curley a chance here, sorry. Mr. Curley, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I'm all for process improvement or efficiency, and it sounds like that some steps were taken to try and improve efficiency, but I want to make sure I understood what you said, Connie, because I thought I heard you say that one of the takeaways from the prior DPW audit was that the town should have a secondary check in place for that scaling activity. And if I heard you correctly with the recent changes, that secondary check is gone.
Correct.
And I want to make sure I heard that correctly, because that's a big concern for me.
Yes, the secondary checkpoint, there is no checking of customer receipts any longer.
They have the ability to
So-
still do that, though, with the person who is up top, is that?
There is a little house up there, I mean,
Where
If they
someone-
choose to check,
Time out, yeah, let's just,
One at a time.
Yeah, if I could continue, I'd appreciate that, Madam Chair. Well, look, I come from a world where process improvements are a big part of what we do, but also proper controls, Sarbanes-Oxley, the whole bit, controls are key. So if we had a finding in our DPW audit that said we need the secondary check on a cash, what is a large cash business, and that check has been removed, I want to make sure we have some other process in place that meets that initial audit requirement without exposing the town to fraud. So I'm looking at the page 121 of the backup, and it shows the total revenue collected. It's roughly $3 million a year. The scale weighting number is about 2.5 million of that, so that's the lion's share of that, going back 2020, 2021, 2022. Do you have any sense, Connie, as to how much of this activity is cash?
I did inquire with DPW administration, and for the time period of July 1 through November 2022, 63.54% of collections at the transfer station was cash, and 3.2% was checks, and 33% was from credit cards. And the total dollar amount collected for that time period was $234,000. Now, a bulk of the revenue that you see in the 3.1 million consists of those debit haulers who pay via check, and the checks are mailed to the DPW administration office. They're applied to the debit hauler's account, and when the debit hauler goes to the transfer station, his account is reduced accordingly based on how much tonnage he has dumped. The other concern, besides cash not being checked by the secondary checkpoint, is the hauler going in and dumping without having his debit account affected by by dumping. So these are two issues where there is a weakness of internal control, two areas.
What are they doing to
Yeah,
file?
and I don't want to suggest that we've got a problem down there, but it's certainly, well, in terms of fraud, but I do recognize that we do have a control problem. And I think it's incumbent on this board to make sure that that control problem is addressed. I mean, again, I'm all for efficiency. If they want to reroute the traffic pattern, great, but you can't take away that control. that's, I can't even fathom that. That's crazy. I have to turn, I'm good for now.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on Mr. Curley's comment. Because Connie, as you first explained the audit, you characterized it somewhat mildly, but you know, what I see here is we've got $3 million of revenue, which is significant. A large portion of it is cash. And, you know, we're kind of on the honor system here. I mean, there's nothing at this point to, I mean, let's start with what can go wrong, right? Because when you put in internal controls, you have to understand what issue you're trying to prevent, right? What risk? So the risk here is that haulers or individuals get waved through that first checkpoint without paying or without weighing in or whatever. And again, a significant amount of this is cash. I was stunned, quite frankly, at management's response to this. I mean, we had this discussion earlier when we talked about the registrar of voters, but the language in here and the response to these audit comments is unprofessional and unacceptable, in my opinion. And you know, I just don't understand this at all. I mean, you know, the idea that we're going to cover this by reserving the right to spot check people is absurd. I mean, there has to be a strengthening of controls here. And you know, our DPW audit specifically recommended that we keep these in place. So I'm just, you know, I don't know how, I realize the hour is late, but I'd like a follow-up on this, and I'd like to hear from the individuals that responded to this audit, because I'm deeply concerned about not only the response, the substance of the response, but the tone of the response, and that basically they're disregarding the recommendations. I don't think that's acceptable on any level. And this is not a compliance issue that, you know, falls with our town attorney and with the Secretary of State. This is a department head who's, you know, responding in a manner that's basically saying, sorry, we're not going to do it. And I just, you know, I'm really struggling with this one. So, you know, I don't know that we're going to resolve it all tonight, but I'd like to, I don't know who provided these responses here, but I'd like them to come before the board and better explain this to us, because, you know, I don't think this is acceptable. Mr. Testani?
Well, Mr. DeWitt had his hand up first.
Oh.
Mr. DeWitt, go ahead.
I seem to remember the DPW, well, first off, I agree with your concerns. I thought the original DPW audit said, you know, not, the way that it was set up before was there were 2 checkpoints, but it wasn't great, right? And I think the DPW audit, I think Mr. Senafani's recommendation was that there'd be a second checkpoint, but not necessarily in the same manner that it was before. So that's the way I recall it. I could be wrong. I don't think he ever said that that was a good way to do it, right?
No, he said to retain the tickets at the secondary checkpoint.
He did say to retain the tickets.
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
You did. I mean,
Okay.
Chris, I agree with you that if we can reroute traffic to make things better and more visible and improve safety, that's all fine and good. That to me has nothing to do with eliminating a second checkpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that there's got to be some reconciliation between receipts here and receipts at another place, but yeah.
Are you done?
Mr. Testani?
Chair, yeah, I understand, you know, your concerns. My opinion, especially working for a corporation, we have a chief fiscal officer here. We have an internal auditor. We have a first select woman. These are town employees. They don't report, with due respect, they don't report to us. They report to people within the town. This is something that we're addressing an issue. I'm sure, you know, especially with Jared being here and Connie, they understand our concerns. So we've already asked for them to follow up, but I think it's not, number one, I'm not sure if some of these employees may be union employees. I don't know if they could or have to answer our questions. That's one. Two, certainly the administration is aware of it, and they're certainly plan on working on an answer, I'm sure. It's probably perhaps more complicated than we think, because we don't work there, we're not the administrators, so I think we've laid the groundwork for what our concerns are, and perhaps we could have, as you indicated, have our internal auditor and/or Jared follow up with us at a future date to address some of these concerns, and in the interim, let the first selectwoman and the administration take the ball and figure out how to perhaps correct some of these issues.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mr. Testani. I think my concern is that reading the responses here, so these are not my recommendations, these are Connie's recommendations. And they have basically rejected the recommendations. That's how I read these responses. In language that is, not great.
Okay.
And our role as a board is to provide oversight. That's why we're hearing this update. So, while I appreciate what you're saying, I have to disagree from the standpoint that, these, as we said at the outset, it's not acceptable for department heads and employees to simply reject recommendations. I mean, there should be an agreement. We made that point before, and I shared the concern you had. So I am not comfortable. I mean, we've had an external auditor and an internal auditor tell us that this is a risk area, that we should have certain procedures in place, and the controls that were in place were eliminated. And I am concerned about that. So I need more information on this, because, to me, this is an area that is a risk area. There's a lot of cash moving around. It's an area that's notorious in municipalities for issues. There have been fraud in other municipalities related to this very issue. So that's where my concern comes from. And, I would like to hear back from, I believe I don't think it has anything to do with the union head. I think it's a department head.
We don't know that.
To this.
Right, well, we're gonna agree to disagree on that, because the department head, again, does not work for the Board of Finance. So if we're gonna start micromanaging verbiage, because that's basically what you're saying. You don't like the verbiage of these remarks, right? So let's drag, let me finish speaking. I let you finish. Let me finish speaking, I let you finish. You don't like the verbiage of these remarks, and I understand that, and I understand it's a concern. So if we're going to pick on verbiage, let's get Matt Wagner in here. Let's get the Democrat-controlled register of voters in here to answer our questions. Anybody that has remarks, no, I'm speaking. Let the person who has an issue with these remarks, let's have them all come in here. In fact, to go back to some complimentary remarks that Ms. Saxel made, she actually thanks and appreciated the cooperation she received. So maybe some of the verbiage of the remarks may not be to our liking, and certainly the concerns of the fiscal controls are things we've already discussed. Having those people be questioned about it is a whole separate issue. When the administration knows about it, the chief fiscal officer knows about it, we've asked the internal auditor to follow up on it. So once we start going down the trail of having people, quote unquote, report to us because of some remarks they've made, where does that slippery slope stop? And I personally, I don't think it's necessary, and I'm not gonna vote for it. Thank you.
I mean, we're not voting on anything.
Okay,
I mean,
good. That's good, because it'd be a no for me.
We have, yes, they're aware of it. They have rejected the recommendations in the internal and external auditor report. And as a board that provides oversight, we should be concerned about that. So That's
Where
all
do you
I'm
see
gonna
that
say.
they rejected it?
Curly?
We're asking for follow-up from the administration and from their, these are the people they report
Provided
to.
the response to the audit.
Okay, so we've
Madam Chair,
asked
did you
for
recognize-
follow-up from that. We've asked for follow-up from
Madam
that.
Chair, did you
We're
recognize
not
me?
their
Point of
bosses.
order, Mr. Testani, point of
Well,
order.
you're not the person
Chair
to
recognized
tell
me.
me to stop, the chairman
She's
is.
recognized.
Thank you, Craig.
Okay.
You're not the person to tell me to stop, the chairman is. I'm not gonna listen to you, I'll listen to her. How's that?
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Testani. Let's try to keep order here. Mr. Curley, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also had concerns with some of the responses to this, to these questions. You know, one of the comments is doubtful this job was always considered the brainless job. I mean, there's a lot of tone in here that's very negative, and anyone who's had any type of audit training recognizes that if there's an issue and there's a negative response like this, that response alone is a red flag. So I absolutely think these type of responses warrant a follow-up. And just doing quick math, looking back at the numbers, we've got $2.5 million of scale weighing revenues, 63% cash in that period that you identified, recognizing that that's a sampling. But we've got about $1.6 million roughly of cash that goes through the system. And earlier we spent a lot of time talking about the COLA adjustment that was applied to the Parks and Rec invoices, 1.7% on, you know, that number incrementally is an incredibly small number relative to this. And I'm not going to say that what our time spent on that COLA adjustment was not important, because it was. Process is important. But this is a much bigger number, and it's in contradiction to the process that was identified as being a problem in the previous audit, and that's been undone. I have a huge concern with this. I think this, look, the administration ran on the idea of putting controls in place to avoid problems that we saw in the previous administration. I applaud that. I agree with that. But this is an opportunity for the administration to make sure that doesn't happen again. And it's not just changing people, it's putting processes in place with proper controls. And that's exactly the opposite of what's happened here. So I would hope that the administration would respond to this and say, fine, change your traffic pattern to make it safer, more efficient, but you can't eliminate that process control. That's got to go back. So I would absolutely welcome a follow-up to the individual who responded here, because to me, this language is a red flag. I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Curley. Mr. Mottola?
Yeah, I mean, I hear what everyone's saying. The problem that the response is, whether you like or dislike the language, they don't address Connie's concerns.
Correct.
That's the bottom line.
That's the problem.
It's Connie's raised the concern, the DPW audit had that same concern, there was a process in place. They eliminated the process, but they haven't come up with something to comply or satisfy the concern that was raised by you and the concern raised by the original DPW audit. So that's the issue here. And that needs to be addressed. And it's not calling in, we have some oversight on it, but the administration should be addressing the lack of response to Connie's concerns. And then there should be a follow-up to this board.
Well,
That's all.
Madam Chair?
Thank you. Mr. Testani?
Yeah, and I alluded to that earlier, that was part of my whole statement, but through the chair, while he's here, why don't we ask the chief fiscal officer, number one, if the first select woman is working on this issue, and number two, in conjunction with his approval, for lack of a better word, we do get a follow-up from our internal auditor.
Yeah, sure. Jack, I I hear what you're saying. I think maybe, and I don't know if there's a misunderstanding here or not, but when the audit reports are issued, management responds, and I think we heard Connie a number of times earlier today say, management agreed with the comment and they complied. They're complying with a new policy, they're gonna do it differently going forward. And that puts an end to it. So when a report is issued in final form, and this is final form, management's response is the resolution. And so what I'm reacting to is this was management responded and rejected the recommendations. The reason I pointed out the language, and we can agree to disagree on that, that's fine. But when I see this sort of language and reaction to recommendations, this speaks, there's a tone here that, I personally find troubling. I want to see our leaders embrace a culture of controls. I want them to recognize the importance of having good internal controls and do their part in implementing those and work constructively with our internal auditors. So when I see language like this, I had the same reaction as Mr. Curley did about the red flag, because it just, this concerns me. So we,
Right, and
so
I
I'd like to.
go ahead, I'm
And
sorry.
that's all. And I'm not trying to get into I hear what you're saying, but like this, we had a response from management. It to Mr. Vitola's point, it rejected the recommendations. It did so in a tone which I found dismissive of the concerns that were raised, and that is problematic to me on a broader scale.
Right.
Because again, I want to see, when we have a situation like we did in this town with the fraud
From
and
the
corruption,
previous administration you're
Sure.
speaking of, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the previous administration, usually when an entity goes through something like that, people get religion, and they want to do things, they want to be lily white and do things in the right way. So I want to see a wholehearted embrace of the recommendations in these audits. And if somebody thinks Ms. Saxel is wrong in what she's recommending, she's a smart person. There can be a conversation, and if she's wrong, somebody can convince her that she's wrong.
Well,
but I think we ended up at a point here where there was an agreement to disagree, and that's not a good place to end up. So I think we need to follow.
And that was what I suggested, and if I could just follow through on asking our chief fiscal officer here if the first selectwoman has started the process of making some corrective measures. There's, I'm sure, a process in place for when employees have these kinds of reactions. And if you don't mind, Jared, maybe you could chime in, let us know what the first selectwoman has worked on, and then from there, I think we could all be in agreement that we would all like to see a follow-up to this, to see what perhaps corrections can take place, and maybe some conversations with the department head as well, for some of the comments that have been made here. But that's not for us to.
Mr. Schmidt,
Thank
do
you,
you want to
if I may.
respond to that?
I would love to. So as Connie noted at the end of her presentation, this is not a closed issue. We're not saying that nothing's going to be done. And there are a couple of things just to give you a more complete picture of what's happening there. There are cameras there, so there is the opportunity to review camera tape. So if there is somebody who, in particular, haulers, to go back and review the camera footage and reconcile that with receipts, or if somebody's just bypassing the gate, that would, you'd be able to pick up on that in the camera. There are staffing issues there. It's not, and again, that's assuming that staffing is the solution. There could be multiple ways of addressing this. It's not just, put another person up there. Technology may be one of the solutions to this that we're considering. And so staffing is difficult because it's not, I think, somebody referred to it in a different way, and in their response, but it's not a coveted job. And it's not, it's difficult to find people who are committed and who are, willing to stay there for lengthy periods of time without having constant turnover of staff there. So that's an issue. And so, it's possible that a better solution may be in the area of technology. In either case, it's going to require funding. Neither one of those things is something that they can do unilaterally. There would, if it's going to be bringing more people in there, that's going to cost money. If it's going to be implementing some kind of technology, that's going to cost money. So that's, and again, we haven't resolved what that solution is going to be, so we're not ready to come to you with a proposal yet for either hiring more people or implementing some kind of technology solution. But the main point I wanted to get across is that this is not, we're not ignoring this. It's not, it's not something that we've written off and this is the end of it. It was the the end of that particular report, but this is an open issue as far as a solution to it.
Mr. Curley?
Yeah, I appreciate that response, Jared. I do, and I do agree that there may be more than one solution here, and I would defer to Connie and the audit process in terms of whether that meets the control standard that is required. I did take exception to one comment regarding the cost associated with putting that control back in place, because the control was to have that person there. I get it that it may be hard to find people to staff that, but that was the process that was there. That was there shouldn't be incremental expense now to put that person back if they were already there. The process has been changed to remove that process. So maybe the savings associated with that does not occur, but it shouldn't be an incremental expense. So I just want to make that point.
The position was not eliminated, as I understand it.
Right.
So we're still paying this person.
Correct.
They're just doing other things. So I had the same question about the incremental cost.
That full-time person is still there. But these would likely be several part-time positions to staff it.
All right, we can continue on. I guess what I would say is that, I agree with Mr. Curley, and I understand your point. It's fine to think about different ways to address this risk and to put the right controls in place. I don't think we should be ripping the existing control out before we figure that out, though. And I think that until we come up with a solution, we should have a control in place to cover this, because we have a significant amount of cash flowing through there, and it's an audit issue that's been raised both internally and externally. So while we figure out what we're going to do next, I really don't understand why we would have eliminated what was there. So let's agree that we can follow up. And Jared, we can talk about follow-up at our next meeting or subsequent meetings so that we can better understand, what the administration's going to do here.
Mr. DeWitt had something to add, it looks like. I'm just pointing.
Mr. Matola, sorry.
No, Mr. DeWitt has had his hand up. I don't know
Oh,
if you saw
Mr.
it.
DeWitt.
Yeah,
Your hand is blending in with the color of
Oh,
your shirt.
sorry, I
can't see it.
apologize. Put it over here. I'm gonna go back to the same question I had from the first audit. I don't know how anybody gets to say no to an audit, right? So the same comment that I had for the registrar, and I don't understand that, is the same comment I guess I'd have for the administration. And I think we can put a bow around this by saying we come in here and have the conversation and address it, I think bringing someone in here to address it is completely appropriate. And maybe we should have the registrar in here as well, or to understand exactly why that person thinks that the audit shouldn't be complied with. So let's distribute the next action equally.
Yeah, that's fine. Ms. Marmion?
Yeah, I agree with what's been said here, and I actually, Lori, wanted to say what you said in terms of time's a wasting. Let's not let time go by while we figure this out. Let's put that second control person back ASAP while we figure out the most efficient way to do this. I don't know if we've looked at other towns and how they run this. You know, it could take us time to figure this out and to look at other places and to come up with the best solution. In the meantime, we are at risk, the town is at risk. So why not put that control, that second person in? Because as we said, we must have been budgeted for it because we eliminated a person. Let's get somebody in there so that we're not at risk. This is really concerning that we might waste a lot of time trying to figure out the best system and in the meantime be at risk.
So,
That
Thank
would
you,
be
Ms.
just, again, it's not my decision, but
Not a bad
I would
idea.
urge you to do that.
that's
All right, I just want to let the board know, I'm looking at the chat, and it says for Matt, and I'm thinking that maybe Matt Wagner, who says he's happy to chat if we like. I wouldn't consider that public comment since he's.
I wouldn't consider it chat either.
And
It's
I
gotta be a
wouldn't want
formal
to, I wouldn't
meeting.
want to chat right now at 11:06 at night on
Okay,
this
I'm
issue.
just throwing it out there, so if
sorry.
we want to hear from Mr. Wagner
Some
at a
other
later
time.
time, it sounds like he's willing to speak to us.
Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen,
Oh.
we have about another 40 minutes anyway.
So Jerry's calling us for 40 more minutes till we go.
Not that you have to use it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Duly noted, Jerry.
Duly noted. This is almost turning into a budget meeting.
Yeah, it's
not
good
Okay.
either.
Any other questions? So, before we wrap up internal audit, I do just want to get on the record a couple of the follow-up items we agreed to. But are there any other questions on this particular audit? Is this the last one, Connie?
Yes,
Wow.
that's
Madam
the
Chair.
last one.
Nice job.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. We still have to talk about DPW. Yes, Mr. Testani?
I just want to say that, I mean, just to kind of sum it up, obviously, again, our chief fiscal officer, our internal auditor are aware of this situation. I understand Ms. Marmion's question/concern about the second person. Certainly, the first selectwoman, whether she watches this now or, in the future, certainly has the internal audit, and I know she'll work on trying to find a solution. What we do until that permanent solution, I think it's incumbent upon Brenda as the first selectwoman and Jared and Connie to figure it out from a financial and a process perspective. And then we ask for the follow-up for whenever date certain or whenever we decide to check back in on to see exactly what controls have taken place now and what will be implemented in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Testani. Any other questions on this item? Okay, so Connie, you saved the best for last.
Yeah.
DPW audit, do you want
Right.
to give us
So,
an update on that?
yes, this is the DPW independent audit. There were 76 audit recommendations made within the independent DPW audit report dated May 19, 2020. The current status is 45 recommendations are fully implemented, 25 are in progress, and 6 are not applicable. The bulk of the progress recommendations, totaling 17, will be closed with the implementation of the new purchasing policy.
There you go, kid.
However, in the meantime, the town purchasing department is aware of the recommendations made within the independent audit report and is adhering to the current purchasing policy and town charter guidelines. Training sessions on purchase requisitions and purchase orders were conducted. Updated policies and procedures regarding credit card purchases and pink voucher purchases were written and distributed to town employees. Contracts over $10,000 now go before the boards. The bid list is updated as bids are awarded. The Bid numbers are now documented on purchase orders, to name a few compliance items that we're currently doing. So we haven't totally not addressed the issues involving purchasing policy. 3 recommendations will be closed with the hiring of the new financial analyst position. The town posted this job opening online in November 2022, and management is currently reviewing applications and resumes. 1 recommendation will be closed upon the implementation of the online permitting system within the fire marshal and health departments. Online permitting is now fully implemented in the building, conservation, plan and zoning, and engineering departments. And finance department has also provided ongoing training to town employees in Munis financial accounting system throughout calendar 22. A training was held in October 22, and individual trainings are also provided to new employees as well throughout the year. Are there any questions?
Remind me, what's the date of the DPW audit?
May 19th, 2020.
Thank you. So 2 years in a couple months.
Mhm.
3
No,
years.
May.
3
You
years.
said May, yeah?
May
May
19th,
19th.
2020.
Yeah, yeah, 3 years.
Yes, this May one. Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, thank you. That's a good overview, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just point out that, looking at your summary sheet, Connie, so as of last year, when we met in January, there were 26 items in process, and now there are still 25 items in process.
Correct.
So on the surface, it doesn't look like a lot has moved. I do recognize that a bulk of those are related to the purchasing policy, which is a separate issue. And I also realize that some of these take time. I know that for the DPW accountant, if you will, there were multiple steps with that because that person had to be put in the budget, and now there's a hiring process. But I do hope that we get to next year with all these numbers at 0, that they've been closed out. And, you know, I don't know if this board has any question. I think for one of our upcoming audit committees, I would like to dive into the ones in process a little bit more and better understand. I can't recall if we talked about them, but the ones that were identified as NA as well. So that's an item we could take up with the audit committee in more detail later this year.
Okay.
Any other questions from the board?
No, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Connie, anything else of significance you want to go through in your report?
No, I believe we covered quite a bit of ground tonight.
I said, how could there possibly be any more?
Normally, we give you your own night, and a bunch of other things snuck on the agenda.
Yeah, we
We've
should
learned our lesson now. Mr. Curley, you had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to commend Ms. Axel for doing an incredible job with these audits. And the one thing that was clear to me throughout is that you were able to put your finger on the pulse of these issues. And obviously, they're very disparate and quite broad, but I really do commend you for the work that you've done, and just wanted to say thank you.
Oh, thank you, I appreciate that.
Thank you, Connie.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Yes,
Thank you.
really great job.
Thank you.
Really great job.
I have one question.
Let's make it her all
Yes.
night
When-
next time.
When you show up in a department, does everyone get nervous when you show up? Do they
I'll
welcome you with
have to
open
say,
arms?
on some occasions, the looks on the faces are like deer in the headlights.
Yeah, I bet. That means you're doing your job.
That's right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's get these minutes over with.
All right.
Yeah.
Right?
All right, so Connie, again, thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Yes, thank you very much.
Looks like we have
I
a few
appreciate
follow-up
it.
items. So just for the record, if Drew's there, I think the follow-up items that I have noted are with sort of stemming from the Greenway Property Services, but I've requested a listing of bid waivers issued in the past year. Wanted to get a better understanding, perhaps from the WPCA, following up on Mr. DeWitt's question and also mine, on what happened to the waste collection and disposal revenues, and then solid waste and recycling. Follow up on that item. So I will work with Jared to schedule a time to follow up on each of those items with the board.
Can we get a list of emergency POs that have been signed too? I thought you said that before, but maybe I was.
Yeah, I said bid waivers, which
Yeah.
I think would encompass emergency POs.
Oh, okay.
So, but yeah,
Yeah, I would say so.
so if
Yeah,
not, then
bid
it would
waivers,
show.
okay.
Yeah,
that's
bid
it.
waiver would
Yeah,
encompass
the
umbrella-
the
emergency
umbrella, yeah.
purchase.
Piece, yep.
Okay, all right, thank you, everyone. All right, thanks again, Connie.
Thank you, appreciate
With
it.
that, we're gonna move to item 8, which is to hear, consider, and act upon the minutes of December 6, 2022. Motion to hear this item. Mr. DeWitt, seconded by Mr. Mottola. The draft minutes are included in the posted backup on page 136. Any comments from the board on these draft minutes? Okay, seeing none, all in favor of approving the draft minutes of December 6, 2022, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, it is unanimous, 7-0. Thank you, everyone. We'll move to item 10, to hear, consider, and act on any communications. Mr. Schmidt, do you have anything for us?
Nothing further.
Okay, thank you. I'll provide an update on committees. I had asked everyone to get back to me after our organizational meeting. I think I announced this last time, but to reiterate, the Senior and Disabled Tax Relief Committee, Ms. Marmion, Mr. Curley, Mr. DeWitt. Audit Committee, Ms. Leclerc, Mr. Mottola, Ms. Charlton. Fund Balance and Debt Service Committee, Mr. Walsh, Mr. Curley, Mr. Stark. Budget Committee, Mr. DeWitt, Ms. Charlton. Purchasing Policy Committee, Mr. DeWitt, Ms. Charlton. Did I miss anything, or does anybody else want to volunteer for any of these committees?
Don't be shy.
I don't see any hands. All right. Quick update also, Budget Committee, and Mr. DeWitt knows this as well. We're trying to schedule a meeting with the administration to go through some of the details of what, implementation details of what we discussed. The one open item, which we have with the administration, and Jared, I know we were going to speak about this, was whether we could actually implement the recommendation around having a joint meeting with the first selectwoman and the superintendent at the outset of the process for all town bodies. So we don't have an answer on that yet, and that will impact a little bit of what we can schedule on each evening, so more to come there. Mr. DeWitt, do you want to say anything about purchasing policy?
Yeah, the only thing I'll say about the purchasing policy, there was a bunch of emails today that I didn't get a chance to look at, but I know Ms. Laborious did give an input to the purchasing policy on behalf of central office on Monday. I don't know if you've read the emails, Ms. Charlton. I saw some comment from Mr. Peterson, but I don't know. But we got input, which is the good thing. We didn't have input from the board of that. We didn't have input from central office, and now we have it. So the next step is going to be to call another meeting and make sure we have first off, create this one document, and then we're trying to get a meeting together based on Joe Santafanti's availability.
Right, and Ms. Carpenter is working on
Yeah,
scheduling
Jen's
that.
working on that, yes.
Yeah, okay. I guess audit committee, Jared, do you have any update on the timing of the audit?
I don't, other than what Joe Senafani sent to you and me, which is that he was going to be reviewing all the information that we had sent to him last week and doing that review throughout this week, and that he would have a better sense at the end of this week or the beginning of next week of when that could be done.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't heard anything else from him on that. So I think the board, we told the board during the last meeting that the audit, the town had filed for an extension to January 31st. So all efforts are underway to make sure that that happens without any further delay. All right, anything else? Questions from anyone? All right. Well, in that case, we can move to item 10, or, Mr. Curley, go ahead.
No, I just want to move.
He wants to adjourn.
We have to drive home, all of us, so let's
Who's
go.
seconding that one?
Thank you, Mr. Matola.
Everybody has to drive home, except you.
Take care.
Right.
Thank you, everyone.